An almighty protest and a political tangle. Even cabinet ministers got caught up. There were ugly skirmishes from far-right demonstrators and more than 100 arrests. The main march was broadly peaceful, but there were arrests later on. And police are investigating hate crimes and anti-Semitism on display. Yet the Home Secretary's accused of stirring up the trouble, rising claims that she should quit.
Forget your resignation letter, Home Secretary!
Her fate is uncertain at this most fraught of times. As we remember the sacrifice of the fallen in past wars and grapple with the reality of conflict abroad. So our main question this morning, are politicians making divisions worse at home? As dignitaries gather at the Cenotaph, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, has joined us. But as a new war rages in the Middle East, we'll hear from Israel's President Isaac Herzog. With the Home Secretary's job in the balance, the woman who wants her job for Labour, Yvette Cooper, is with us too. And what are you watching on TV? What are you seeing on your phone? We'll hear from the first time from Lord Grade, the boss of Ofcom, who sets the rules. And we'll pay a special visit to Whitehall on this poignant day before the clocks ring out at 11.
I'm at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday. Almost 10,000 people are getting ready to take part in the march past here later this morning, and I will be talking to some of them.
Morning on this special day. With me at the desk, the former Cabinet Minister, Nadine Dorries, whose long-awaited book exploded into Westminster this week. Shami Chakrabarti, Labour peer, legal brain and human rights activist. And Lord Kim Darragh, the former British ambassador to Washington and diplomat. And before we do anything else today, I want to show you live pictures of what is happening on Whitehall, the special BBC coverage of the solemn moment of national remembrance today. Sophie Rayworth and David Dimbleby will be on after us. We have an extended programme until 10:15 today. But it's all taking place in a very fraught political environment, as the front pages show. Most of them splash on yesterday's marches in London. The Sunday Times said there was hate, intolerance and arrests as thugs hijacked Armistice Day. The Sunday Telegraph quotes the Prime Minister, who said far-right thugs and Hamas sympathisers disrespect our heroes. The Mail on Sunday picks up on Michael Gove being caught up in one of the protests at London's Victoria Station, saying he was jostled and abused by a pro-Palestinian mob. But the Sunday Mirror highlights Suella Braverman's role in all of this, saying sack her now. The Home Secretary, of course, who raised eyebrows this week, having suggested that the police had gone soft on some kinds of protest. Nadine Dorries, firstly to you, you were in government for a long time. We all saw what happened yesterday. We've all seen what happened this week with this very tense debate about the police. How difficult do you think it's been for the government to handle it? What did you think when you saw the protest?
Well, first point to your question, how difficult it's been to handle it. It wouldn't have been difficult if there had been some kind of cohesive leadership shown within government. I think the fact that we had, you know, the whole story about Suella's article not having been given approval, I find that almost impossible to believe, really? Having served as a Secretary of State myself. But then you had a Prime Minister trying to ride a number of horses at any one time and to please everybody. And you can't do that when you're a Prime Minister and a leader. You have to show absolutely distinctive leadership. And I'm afraid that Rishi Sunak just failed in that. And I think a lot of the problems don't lie at Suella Braverman's door. They lie at the Prime Minister's door because he's the person in charge.
Shami, do you think that what Suella Braverman said this week has stirred it up? A lot of your colleagues in the Labour Party have actually pointed the finger directly at her. Is that fair?
It is, but like Nadine, I think the Prime Minister has to take some responsibility, because even his language of saying, just in advance of this weekend, I will hold the Commissioner accountable.
The Met Police boss.
That is almost an invitation to people to come and misbehave, knowing that they might see off the Met Commissioner if they do that. I think it was an interference with operational independence. Now, of course, the Home Secretary is the pantomime villain and she's bad cop, but I don't think the Prime Minister can hide behind her much longer, actually.
And Sir Mark Rowley, I think, actually did a good job
Yeah.
yesterday. There were no
They played a
major damage to property, nobody was harmed in any significant way. And I think it was okay. He managed okay. But you know, the point on Michael Gove in that, I've got to raise it. What was Michael Gove doing in the middle of Victoria Station on a day when every other sensible politician would not want to make the police job any harder and would keep... I mean, was he drunk? What was he doing there in the middle of Victoria... Well, no, to coin a phrase. But why was he there? What judgment made him walk through Victoria Station?
Well, Kim,
was that playing to the gallery?
Well, as a diplomat, a former diplomat, you know, you're not somebody who is going to play politics with all of this. Well, perhaps you feel like doing so this morning, but looking from the outside, there's been a furious political debate in this country about protest and the right to protest. How do you think it has been handled?
Do you know, when I was National Security Advisor before going to Washington, I used to talk to the head of the Met Police, not every week, but quite often. And if I'd been talking to him last week, I would have said, if I were in your shoes, I would ask for postponement, just because there has been so much political controversy about this that it's bound to bring the wrong sort of people, the Tommy Robbins of this world, out, and there's going to be a level of trouble and it may get out of control. If I'd advised that, I mean, I would have been wrong, because I agree with Nadine. I think he just about made the right judgment here. And I think the police did a pretty good job in managing it. Could still have gone wrong with those potential clashes between marchers and right-wingers. But in the end, it happened, and I'm glad it did, and freedom of speech principle was respected. So in that sense, I think it was successful.
Okay,
I don't agree with what Suella Braverman said, though, and my experience of the police, I do not recognise the description of them as biased.
Interesting. Well, we talked to Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, about that a little bit earlier this morning, after the Prime Minister had condemned the thuggery during yesterday's protests and the anti-Semitism on display during some of the march. This is what Grant Shapps had to say about what went wrong.
Well, actually, I was at the Cenotaph yesterday, laying a wreath, and to see here, actually, specifically, people disrupting proceedings is obviously distressing. We're all there to come together to remember the brave men and women. As it happens, EDL had already said they were going there, so I'm not sure that one is connected to the other at all. The fact of the matter is, there are people who I'm afraid don't really want to respect Remembrance weekend, and it doesn't matter whether they're the far right EDL or I'm afraid some of the protesters on the other side. It is not a respectful thing to do during Remembrance weekend, when we should all be there to remember the brave men and women who've laid down their lives for this country.
And no one seeing the images of what happened, where a group of thugs descended on the Cenotaph, intent on causing trouble. Yeah. The police have been very clear. There were people often involved in football hooliganism before who turned up looking for a fight. However, there has been widespread concern before this weekend that the kinds of sentiment that Suella Braverman, your colleague, was using would stir up precisely this kind of thing. And what's very interesting, I think, to a lot of people this morning is the police themselves on the record have implied that this was the case. I'd like to show everyone what the Met Police said last night. They said there were unique circumstances with the backdrop of conflict in the Middle East. But look at this. Following a week of intense debate about protest and policing, these all combined to increase community tensions. Now, if we do a bit of translate on that, that is the police implying very clearly that the Home Secretary's stirring up of this debate made things worse.
So, look, there was lots of debate in the week beforehand. Quite rightly, we live in a democratic society, about whether on Remembrance weekend, when you had both Armistice Day on the Saturday and then, of course, today itself, where, once again, people will be back at the Cenotaph, whether this was the weekend to go out and protest, and whether that's going to protest for one cause or just turning up as thugs. Neither, I think, was particularly becoming for this weekend. And that's a perfectly, though, proper debate to have in a democratic society. There's no reason not to have those discussions. I think it would have been better if people concentrated on the remembrance part of this. It was quite unsurprising there'd be a debate about, hundreds of thousands of people coming out for other means.
But you say there it would have been better to focus on remembrance. Would it have been better then if Suella Braverman had not, as she did in the pages of the Times newspaper, without full sanction from Number 10, suggested that the police don't always play fair?
Well, look, I think it's, first of all, on the police, I think it's incredibly important that where people have breached the law, going around carrying banners with swastikas on them, for example, shouting from the river to the sea, which is clearly an anti-Semitic trope, that they arrest people and that they prosecute. I think that is very important. I think it's also true to say that the police have an incredibly difficult job to do, and I actually just want to pay tribute to their work yesterday in policing what's a very, very complex picture, particularly in London. And to answer your question directly, which I'll come to now, to answer your question directly, as others in Cabinet have said, I wouldn't use that set of words myself, but I do think that the sentiment that it's very important not just to take action, but also to get the prosecutions and essentially ensure that people don't feel that they can do these things, say these things, wave these banners around, sometimes supporting prescribed organisations, as in Hamas,
but the police,
without sanction, is also very important.
But the police have said that the debate, which was prompted by your colleague Suella Braverman, and you've just said you wouldn't have said what she had said.
No, I wouldn't have used those words. I think the point about...
So you and many colleagues have distanced yourself from those remarks, and the police have said that the debate increased tensions in the community. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it, where you have the police and other people sitting alongside the Home Secretary in Cabinet basically pointing the finger and saying she shouldn't have said what she said, and also it made things worse. And Conservatives have said this too. One of your colleagues, Minister Paul Scully, suggested that she had been fuelling hatred and division.
I'm saying that I do think it's very important that the police act quickly. I think there have been concerns sometimes that people have felt at liberty. Let me just finish this one thought, if I may. At liberty, perhaps because they haven't seen swift enough action to carry on going out, carrying these banners, singing these chants and breaking laws which were in place to prevent racial hatred. On the other hand, I wouldn't put it in those particular set of words because I recognise the police have a very difficult job to do in managing marches which contain large numbers of people. A lot of that work has to be done afterwards.
But it does sound, though, that you are rather blaming the police for not having always been quick enough to clamp down on this kind of thing.
The problem with not acting swiftly enough is you don't end up with people experiencing the consequences of breaking the law. Again, we saw yesterday on that large march, people chanting, carrying banners, which are designed to stir up racial hatred, which are designed to support a terrorist organisation. It's very important to crack down on that. At the same time, as I say, I'm not blaming the police, in fact, because I think they have an incredibly difficult job to do.
And you're trying to, do two things here. You're praising the police for doing a difficult job, but also clearly you are saying that they haven't always been tough enough on this kind of thing at protests. Does the Home Secretary, in your view, bear no responsibility for the disorder that we saw yesterday?
Well, the people who, just to be absolutely clear, the people who bear entire responsibility, the thugs who turned up in and around the Cenotaph area in Whitehall and then in Chinatown and Soho and elsewhere.
Does the Home Secretary bear no responsibility for creating the climate?
No,
Are you disagreeing with what the police have said then?
Yeah, look, I just think the police, I think, quite rightly refer to the debate in advance, which are largely around whether this weekend was an appropriate weekend to go out and protest, given...
Which was stirred up by your colleague, Suella Braverman.
When you say stirred up, discussed by, yes, it's absolutely right to talk about. We live in a democratic society. It's perfectly proper to discuss whether this is an appropriate weekend to go and do this.
And in the way she discussed it, she also defied Downing Street by putting a published article into the Times without making the edits that Downing Street had wanted her to make. Now, it's not really about that. It's about authority. She defied the orders of Downing Street. Should she be sacked? Because plenty of your colleagues have told me privately, not just that she should be sacked, that she might even be sacked tomorrow, or maybe she'll be sacked on Wednesday. Will Suella Braverman be Home Secretary by the end of the week?
Well, first of all, I don't know the sort of ins and outs of the process of how an article was published in this particular case. And secondly, as you'd absolutely expect me to say, the Prime Minister is in charge of whomever he wants in his cabinet, and he will make that decision whenever he wants to reshuffle, whether he does want to reshuffle his cabinet. I don't come with new news on that front.
But it would be easier for you as a cabinet colleague not to have to always go around cleaning up controversies that have been caused by your colleague Suella Braverman, because it's not the first time, is it?
Look, I just don't see things that way. We're free to debate issues. Not all of us are going to agree all the time.
But the
everything
principle
that
of
is
government,
said.
the principle of cabinet government is discipline. It's that you stick together. It's not that you have cabinet ministers going around the place, as some of your colleagues see it as shooting their mouth off, stirring up headlines for themselves day after day. You know, this isn't just a kind of isolated incident. Lots of your colleagues have had enough of Suella Braverman behaving as she does. And for as long as this goes on, doesn't the Prime Minister risk looking a bit weak, like he just can't do anything about it because he doesn't have the power?
Well, I know it's always kind of quite tempting to sort of personalise this about one individual.
Well, it's the Home Secretary, it's not just some random person.
Sure, but what we then get into is, well, would you have used this word, or would you have phrased it or written it in an article like that? This is the minutiae. The big picture is, actually, this government is clear in its stance against terrorism, and for that matter, the idea that people should not be able to go onto British streets, and ideally not this weekend of all weekends, and in some cases promote those terrorists.
Well, we will see what the next couple of days bring, because I think words do matter, and it does matter very much who sits around the cabinet table. Just finally, we are also speaking to President Herzog of Israel in a few minutes' time on the programme this morning. But some of Israel's allies, like France, like the United States, are starting to express concern about the extent of the response. Do you think Israel has gone too far in its response to the horror of what happened? President Macron even said it should stop, there should be a ceasefire. Does the UK believe that Israel is acting proportionately?
The UK believes strongly that Israel must act within international humanitarian law.
Do you believe Israel's acting proportionately?
And secondly, I've seen and actually read on the BBC in particular very detailed accounts of how Israel military leaders have called up people and asked for their assistance in ensuring that civilians in Gaza are moved before they go after Hamas terrorists. I think it's kind of, we've sort of forgotten that in war, very sadly, people lose their lives. When Britain bombed, people apparently lost their lives. People die in war. When you have an organisation like Hamas hiding and shielding themselves with and under the civilian population, it's a sad fact that some people will lose their lives.
You can see, though, that some of Israel's allies, like the US, like France, are uneasy with the scale of that response. That's not to say no civilians are going to be caught up in this.
Yeah.
That is the sad reality of what people see happening right now. But do you believe, I ask again, what Israel is doing is proportionate?
I think Israel obviously is in a difficult place because when they go after the terrorists, some civilians are getting caught up. No one wants to see a civilian life. It doesn't matter if it's an Israeli or somebody from Gaza taken. However, if Britain had been subject to an attack of terrorists coming in, murdering 1,400 people, cutting off heads, we would not, and we knew where those terrorists had gone, no one would be saying to Britain, well, just stop going after them, even though, you know, those tunnels, those caves that they operate from, where all of those tens of thousands of rockets are being stored, how can we ask Israel not to go and destroy those bunkers? And unfortunately in war, you end up in a situation where other people get caught up in it. The answer is for Hamas to stop using those people as human shields. And by the way, release the over 200 hostages they have, some of whom are Brits. And so we should absolutely be on the side of right, and right in this case is going after Hamas.
Can you tell us anything about the British hostages you mentioned there?
Only that we are working our socks off to try to get them released, working very closely in ways I can't go into on TV, and I'm arranging to speak to the families of some of the British hostages as well. And our thoughts are with those who are being held, well over 200 every single day. They've been, I think, in some ways forgotten in this conflict. It's where it started, and the wrong is entirely on Hamas's side for keeping them hostage at this time.
Okay. Defence Secretary, thank you very much for coming in. We must let you get off to the service at the Cenotaph. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Well, what did you think of what Mr Shapps had to say? Let us know. You can email us at kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or on social media. If you're that way inclined, use the hashtag. And there's always tons going on the BBC website as we're on air too. Now, however many people were on the streets here and in capitals around the world yesterday, Israel's bombardment of Gaza goes on. This weekend, surgeons at the largest hospital there, Al-Shifa, claimed the intensive care unit was hit and that the facility has run out of water, food and electricity. But with Israel's allies calling for more caution, how long can this retaliation for the appalling October the 7th attacks really go on? Early this morning, I asked Israel's president what those Hamas attacks that day had changed.
We are extremely agonized. We're a nation which is an optimistic nation. We're a peace-loving nation, and we strive for the inclusion of our nation in the region as such. And we have a nation that have contributed and will always contribute to the well-being of humanity. And all of a sudden, our world was shattered because many of our beliefs in the fact that we can live side by side with Palestinian neighbors were shattered. In that morning, the most horrific atrocities since World War II took place. And many of the casualties were the biggest proponents and supporters of peace ever in the history of Israel. And they were all butchered and chopped and killed and abducted and raped. And the amount of pain and suffering and the horrific information that flows ever since, because Hamas had filmed it all and broadcasted it all live and also afterwards on their cameras on their bodies, is unending. And you know, today is Armistice Day. Armistice Day in the United Kingdom for me is always a special day, because my late father, Chaim Herzog, who was a high-ranking British officer in World War II, who landed in Normandy and liberated Belgium and Holland and went all the way to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp as one of the first officers to enter that place of hell. And until today, I meet survivors from that camp. So today is Armistice Day, and on that day and on this weekend, you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people supporting, by their demonstrations, supporting Hamas. I want to show you something exclusive, Laura. So this is Adolf Hitler's book, translated to Arabic, Mein Kampf. It's the book that led to the Holocaust and the book that led to World War II. This is the book that led to his victory in elections in Germany, which led to the worst atrocity of humankind, which the British fought against. Well, this book was found just a few days ago in northern Gaza in a children's living room, which was turned into a military operation base of Hamas, on the body of one of the terrorists and murderers of Hamas. And he even marked, he wrote notes, he marked and learned again and again Adolf Hitler's ideology of hating the Jews, of killing the Jews, of burning the Jews, of slaughtering the Jews. This is the real warrior act. So all those who demonstrated yesterday, I'm not saying that all of them support Hitler, but all I'm saying is by omitting to understand what Hamas ideology is all about, they're basically supporting this ideology.
There will be many people who were on the streets, though, not just in London, but in other capitals around the world, who are on the streets because they want to see an end to the violence in the Middle East. Now, viewers will hear the hurt and agony that you have expressed, that Israelis have felt. But your allies, many of the people who back Israel, believe that the extent of your response has now gone too far. President Macron has called for a ceasefire. He said Israel is killing babies and it needs to stop. The Secretary of State of the United States, Antony Blinken, has said too many Palestinians are being killed. Isn't it time, President Herzog, that you listen to your allies, notwithstanding that terrible pain of your countrymen?
So first of all, we listen to our allies, but first and foremost, we defend ourselves. And President Macron already last night and even today in an article in Le Parisien actually corrected the image that came out of that interview, because of course he made it clear Israel does not intentionally kill civilians, children and innocent people. God forbid we don't. We operate according
President Herzog,
exactly according to wait, Laura, you have to enable. We work exactly according to the rules of international humanitarian law. We alert each and every civilian because their homes have become terror bases. Please go out. We send them leaflets, we call them, we phone them, we text them, we enable them to go down, we give them humanitarian pauses so that they can go down. Unfortunately, There are tragedies, we don't shy away from them, but truly many of the tragedies are done by Hamas, like they bombed Shifa Hospital yesterday, not Israel. And we can go on and on by explaining this, but one thing is clear. We need to eradicate that terror machine. We need to eradicate this ISIS, Hamas, Hitler ideology. This is the truth. Otherwise, you won't have peace in the Middle East. And believe me, I'm a huge supporter of peace in the Middle East all my life. But unfortunately, so long as there is terror, nobody can indirectly or directly support terror, because that's the reason that we're at war.
But you say there that Al-Shifa was bombed not by Israel, but there are reports there on the ground of babies dying in the neonatal unit after power to their incubators was cut off. You say that Gazans have been told to leave.
That is not true. By the way, it's not true.
Well, we will try through the day.
There is a lot of spin by Hamas. There's a lot of spin by Hamas, but there's electricity in Shifa. Everything is operating. We're speaking to the managers. We haven't gone into Shifa. We're unfortunately underneath Shifa. There's a huge, huge terror base. Actually, the headquarters of Hamas ISIS operations is right there under Shifa. Now, exactly what are we supposed to do? Leave it as is, and then in a few years' time go again through the same motion, and you will say it's disproportionate and we will have civilians being killed? So we are calling on all of those uninvolved to go out to another hospital nearby, and we're coordinating it very delicately with all forces around that space.
Well, the World Health Organization this morning has said they've lost communications with that hospital, and there are reports from doctors there on the ground about a terrible situation. And our viewers there can see the images from Gaza that many, many people have not been able to leave. They have not been able to escape. But you mentioned there, President Herzog, what may happen next.
Hamas is stopping them.
We're short of time.
Hamas is blocking them.
And I would like to move on to what happens next. Because for decades, there has been conflict in your part of the world. And there has never been a military solution. So what is Israel's end game? How do you bring this to an end? Prime Minister Netanyahu has said Israel will take security responsibility for Gaza for an indefinite period. That sounds like a full-on occupation. Is that your plan?
So let me explain to you and just remind your viewers that we've actually tested all options. We've had peace treaties, we'd had agreements, we had a unilateral pullout from Gaza itself in 2005. We took off everybody. We left to the last inch. Unfortunately, we got terror because the Iranian-supported Hamas had a coup d'etat in 2007. They kicked out the Palestinian Authority, which is another example of failure of the Palestinians to adhere to the agreement.
So what
and
is the solution
since
now?
Then we had tens of thousands of missiles. So there is a real question. How do we get to peace? And you know what's the real answer is? First, stop terror. Terror is what derailed all peace agreements in the region. Terror is what is the aim. The aim of terror is to derail the current agreements and the inclusion of Israel and the normalization with its Arab neighbors. But I'm actually hopeful because I believe the train has left the station. And I'm adamantly believing in the fact that we can get to peace. But we can get to peace if people adhere to the agreements and don't revert to terror. But atrocious terror, like the one we've seen, which the world hasn't seen since World War II, must be eradicated completely so that we can give hope to our neighbors, the Palestinians.
But President Herzog, do you accept that Israel's own activities in the West Bank have fueled Palestinian anger, that what has been happening over the last few years has been part of the problem, stoking feelings up?
I can go on and on about that. You know why? Because when there was the agreements, the Oslo Accords, there was suicide bombers for years and years that simply derailed any ability to get to peace and forced us to use much more military means. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority has failed time and again in combating terror from its own courtyard. And you know why? Because part of their education system is filled with hate, with prejudice, with curses, with all sorts of information which is totally distorted against what Jews are, what Israel is all about, including this type of stuff, this and ISIS material, which we find all over Gaza, in their own schools, where we find in those schools bombs and grenades and missiles in schools and mosques. So part of the real gist of why it failed so far is the education of the people, something which Israel has alerted time and again, and the fact that terror was becoming legitimate in some quarters of Palestinian society. This is what we have to work on, parallel to the ability to sit down and speak and find ways and means towards a better future in the future.
President Herzog, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Israel's president, and it is always hard to sort claim from counterclaim in the middle of any conflict, but the BBC and particularly our teams on the ground will always try to get to the truth and establish exactly what has been going on. Kim Darroch is a former very senior diplomat. Listening to that, do you think that Israel is concerned at all about losing the support of its allies? We've heard from President Macron, we've heard from Secretary of State Blinken for the United States suggesting they are going too far. Do you think the picture is changing?
I think it is shifting a bit. I think that up to a point, Israel does care about what the West is saying, cares in particular about what America is saying. So messages coming out of Europe have less impact there than whatever the United States is saying. But in the end, the Israelis don't trust anyone with their own security other than themselves. I think that in private, the Americans in particular, maybe us too, are giving some quite tough messages to the Israeli government about need for humanitarian pauses, which have sort of started, although only briefly each day, and about the need to minimize civilian casualties as the death toll mounts in Gaza. Those messages, I believe, in private, getting tougher. We've even had a glimpse of Tony Blinken saying something more publicly about this. So the pressure on them is mounting, and every day that this offensive, this ground operation in Gaza City continues, I think a little bit of Western's public support, media support, and maybe political support ebbs away. But in the end, the Israelis will ultimately take their own decision about what they need for their security.
Shami.
But you've also got to consider, and I agree with that, you have to consider a domestic opinion in Israel itself. And people sometimes forget that just like Britain isn't a monolith, and we have differences of opinion about difficult subjects, the same will be true of Israelis. And one of the reasons why I really think that now, after over a month, it's time to look towards ceasefire is the hostages are not free.
The Israeli hostages.
The Israeli hostages are probably in the tunnels, and and the longer this goes on with general bombardment rather than some attempt at either negotiation or extraction, those remaining hostages, which many Israelis think should be the priority for the government. I think longer term, personally I found President Macron very compelling in his interview, and not just on this subject, but on other topics too. But I also think this is going to become counterproductive to Israelis' own long-term peace and security, because with respect to President Herzog in this very difficult time for him and his people, I don't think Hamas is a machine as he described it. I think it's more like an organism. And the danger is you cannot destroy that ideology with bombs alone. In the end, you're going to have to create an alternative and some hope so that you can, so that people do not become recruited to the cause. Future generations don't become recruited to the terrorist cause.
Nadine, I'll come to you in a second about what the UK government should be doing. But Kim, as a former diplomat, if you were looking at this now on paper and thinking, what could be a solution? What could it be? Is there any prospect of a political solution anytime soon?
Probably not anytime soon if we're talking about days or even weeks. I think this Israeli ground offensive, this ground operation, is likely to carry on for a few weeks yet. I think they're getting to the centre of Gaza City, and they will want to go into the tunnels. They will want to eliminate Hamas weapons stores and this kind of thing. But the striking thing for me about President Herzog's interview with you, Nora, is he ducked the question about what next. And there are two issues about what next. First of all, who runs Gaza when the military operation is finished? And second, long term, how do we restart We can't go back through this again. There have been 10 wars in Israel since its foundation in 1948. This has to be the trigger to renew a process on a two-state solution. And how is that going to start? Not, I suspect, with Netanyahu as Israel's Prime Minister.
And of course, he's deeply unpopular at home. Nadine, the UK government has been, sticking closely to its line all the way through. And we heard it again from Grant Shapps today that Israel has a right to defence. He was reluctant to echo Emmanuel Macron, even Tony Blinken, who've, had these notes of caution. Do you think the government's right to do that?
I'll just go to what Kim said. The two-state solution is the way forward. That's what our government should also be articulating. That's where we need to get, the place we need to get to. But of course, Hamas prevent that. They prevented us reaching that situation which has been desired in the region for many years now. But what we can't forget is that, nobody wants to see, the Israelis don't want to bomb Palestinian civilians or to murder babies or for the Palestinian civilians to be the consequences of these actions. But by the same token, Hamas did cross the border and rape and murder in the most appalling way 1,400 Israeli citizens. How would we respond if that was us? And I think from the government's response, these two situations are very difficult to find an ameliorative solution to bring this together. But there has to be a way where the government articulates, yes, we back the Israeli state, of course we do, but yes, we should also be looking for peace in the region and for Palestinian individuals and the people. And to do that, the only way we can do it is to get to a two-state solution.
It's difficult for the Labour Party as well, Shami. You're someone who's very much associated with the fight for human rights. There are parts, I suppose, in your segment of the Labour Party that have been very unhappy with Keir Starmer refusing calls for a ceasefire. He lost the front bencher this week over his refusal to do so. But it's interesting when you talk to people in the party, one party source this week, it was reported, shrugged off the problems and the resignations, saying it was like shaking off the fleas. Now, what did you feel when you heard that?
Well, that particular piece of briefing, and of course Nadine's written a book about off-the-record briefings. I'm
going to talk about that in a second.
But it's not just in your party, if I may say that. To use that phrase, particularly when so many, not all, but so many of the people who have been very upset about the bombardment of Gaza are British Muslims, including members of the party and voters for the party and councillors. To use that phrase is very inflammatory and arguably racist. And if that was briefed out by a press officer or somebody else working for the party, they should be disciplined.
Do you think that the leadership should hunt out what happened there?
I think that particular phrase has caused a great deal of hurt and concern. And we're worried about racism and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and things that happen over there spilling into communities over here. We certainly don't need briefing like that from anybody working for the Labour Party.
We'll see what happens in the coming days, and it'll be interesting to see if the leadership has anything to say about this. Now, Nadine, also in the background of all of this, as we touched on at the beginning of the programme, is unhappiness in the Tory party about the Home Secretary's behaviour. Do you think Suella Braverman should be sacked?
Gosh, look, there's one overriding concern I have over the reaction to Suella Braverman. I've already said I absolutely do not believe that her article, which is at the root of all of this, went into the Times newspaper and was not approved by. I just don't believe that. So I think that's, part of the briefing machine that goes out. But what I've seen with Suella is, and I saw it with Priti Patel, and I see it with any woman who reaches high office, is this backlash which has to be and is steeped in both misogyny and sexism. It's rife both in politics and I'm sad to say in the media too.
Do you think she's
I experienced it just for writing a book, I experienced it when I was Secretary of State. Should Suella be sacked? No, she shouldn't. Because actually the person who was responsible, as I've said, is the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He needs to own the problems which are taking place as a result, supposedly, of her article in the Times. If Number 10 did not take control of that, and I think it points to a deeper problem in Downing Street at the moment, and that is a weakness. They don't know what each other is doing, what the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and an absolute weakness in the Prime Minister's office himself. He can't decide on a straight line that he's going to put out either over the protest or on what's happening in Gaza. He can't decide on a straight line.
But there's no surprise that you might say that as one of Boris Johnson's most ardent supporters. And in your book, The Plot, you make a significant list of claims about how Boris Johnson was somehow undermined by people who've been out to get him from the very beginning. Isn't it actually just the case that he got caught out? He had a very tricky relationship with being able to tell the truth. He made lots of mistakes. And in the end, MPs in his party looked at him and thought, you're doing us more damage than gain. Time to go.
So first of all, when you say it's I've written it, it's not me. So this book is
your book based on conversations
it's
with lots
my
of
book,
people.
but it's actually directly translated conversations with former prime ministers, home secretaries, chancellors, senior civil servants. It's not actually my take on the situation. It's that of other people.
It's a very good read. I couldn't put it
Shami's
down.
read it as a reviewer for us. It's more
Thank you, Shami. This is alive and well. But yeah, so no, you know, and honestly, I think I would say to anybody, read the book, because it says in very clear detail how we got to that situation of Boris Johnson being moved, who the key players were, what they did, and as Shami just said, the briefings, you know, who runs the media output, what briefings do they put out there, how do they make those stories run in the press, how is public perception controlled?
Okay.
That's what it's about.
Okay, and Kim Darsh, just before we finally move on, as somebody who used to work at the highest levels of government as a civil servant, as an advisor, when you see this kind of thing play out, these kind of soap operas, how damaging is it to the government's reputation? How much of a pain is it on your back when you're just trying to get things done?
It's damaging, unquestionably. And if you look at the combination of the book, and I've read the media stuff, but I haven't read the book yet, and the stuff that came out of the COVID inquiry, which made the government look like the set of in the thick of it. That gets all the embassies in London pick it up, other governments know what's going on. It makes us look shambolic, and it is damaging. So there's no question that it does us harm.
Okay, all three of you, thank you so much. We'll be back with you towards the end of the show. Well, as we've heard, responding to events in the Middle East is not easy for either of our big political parties. Keir Starmer lost a front bencher this week, and there's a vote in the Commons in the coming days to demand a ceasefire. That's being pushed by the SNP. That might make things more awkward for him in the coming days. Well, Yvette Cooper wants Suella Braverman's job to be Labour's next Home Secretary, and she joins us now from her Yorkshire constituency. Good morning. Now, Sadiq Khan, your colleague, the London Mayor, has blamed Suella Braverman directly for the clashes at the protest yesterday. Is he right?
Well, Remembrance should have been a weekend for everyone to come together, and we did see some appalling scenes in the capital yesterday, including the far-right, thuggish, violent behaviour, attacks on police officers, of people trying to get to the Cenotaph, and also we saw some awful anti-Semitic cases as well that are still being investigated by the police. I think we should thank the police for the work they did to make sure that Armistice wasn't disrupted. That was what they said they would do. But it is undoubtedly the case that the Home Secretary made the job of the police harder this weekend. She inflamed tensions. She also attacked the police, undermined respect for the police at a really important time. That was highly irresponsible. It's just not the way any Home Secretary would do that job, other than Suella Braverman. And Rishi Sunak is being so weak that he is allowing her to do that. It's very damaging.
Should she be sacked then?
She shouldn't carry on in this job. Clearly, he needs to take action to do this, and he needs to remove her. But to be honest, he also should not have appointed her to this job in the first place, because recall that she was appointed 5 days after being sacked by Liz Truss for breaking the ministerial code. And I think it's also the fact that we've had this effectively support for her position of undermining the police at such an important time, casting doubts on their impartiality, casting doubts on their operational independence, rather than working with them. You really need the Home Secretary to have credibility and authority on working with the police, on helping make sure that communities are cohesive and calm. She doesn't have the authority or credibility to do that.
There is an interesting broader principle, though, behind this, isn't there? You aspire to be the next Home Secretary if there's to be a Labour government. Home Secretaries have responsibility for policing, and surely the police can't act with complete impunity. Doesn't the Home Secretary actually have a role from time to to call them out if they believe they're going wrong?
You're right that there has to be a framework for accountability, and there are processes to do that. And certainly when policing events happen, of course, there will be questions asked afterwards about what should happen. There's also a responsibility on the Home Office to make sure that proper standards are in place for policing, proper procedures and approaches are in place for policing. But the operational independence it's a really deep-rooted part of the British policing tradition. Goes back very many generations.
But there's an interesting example of it, Cooper. When the awful and sad case of Nicola Bulley came up in Lancashire, I'm sure viewers will remember all of that. We spoke about what was going on at that time. You spoke then about the police's decision to release some of her private information, and you expressed significant concern about that. Now, that was an operational decision, and you felt in that moment it was the right thing to be critical of the police.
And it is right to ask questions about operational decisions that the police have made. But that's not what the Home Secretary was doing. And bear in mind, she's the Home Secretary, so she has a responsibility that is different from other members of Parliament and so on. She has the responsibility to work closely with them. And what she was doing was casting doubts, this blanket attack on their impartiality, on their ability to do the job. Now, we know the police operate without fear or favour. There will be all kinds of individual decisions that many of us may disagree with. There are also proper complaints processes that are in place around individual decisions as well. But this blanket attack on the impartiality of the police in the run-up to a very difficult weekend, and also the decision to inflame tensions, to deliberately escalate and increase the temperature, also in the run-up to Remembrance weekend, when the Home Secretary should have been playing a role to bring communities together, to calm tensions, to call for respect for the remembrance, for the armistice. Actually, what she did was just highly irresponsible. There's a reason that no other Home Secretary would ever do that and has ever done that. And the events that we saw yesterday are that reason.
There are lots of fraught conversations across politics at the moment, and some of those difficult conversations are also happening in the Labour Party. Many in your party want Keir Starmer to be saying there should be a ceasefire in the Middle East. And we've heard in the last few minutes, Yvette Cooper, the Labour peer, Shami Chakrabarti, suggests that some of the anonymous briefings from the leader's office bordered on being racist and were offensive. Now, the briefing she was referring to, in case you didn't hear, was to saying that resignations from the party on the issue of a ceasefire were just shaking off the fleas. Do you think that that briefing was racist and offensive?
So my understanding is that did not come from anybody anywhere near the Labour leadership, and that the party has made that abundantly clear, and I understand that that has been recognised and accepted. Clearly it's a totally disgraceful thing to say, and that's why nobody in the Labour leadership would have said it. We shouldn't sort of perpetuate the misinformation about this. It is clearly disgraceful, but my understanding is it has nothing to do with the Labour leadership.
And when it comes, though, to the vote in the next few days in the House of Commons, will Labour MPs, will Labour shadow ministers who want to vote for a ceasefire be disciplined if they vote against the leadership's position?
So I think you're talking about possible votes that may take place around the King's speech. Just in terms of what the procedures are, I think there's around 15 amendments already that have been put down around the King's speech. There may be more, and we don't yet know which amendments the Speaker will select or what the next steps will be. There's always then a process in which the Labour Party and the whip set out the response at that point.
But there is likely to be a vote on a ceasefire in the Middle East, Yvette Cooper. Will Labour MPs, will Labour front benchers be
so let me
sacked
address the broader
if they vote for a ceasefire?
So let me address the broader issue, because I can't preempt the processes around the Speaker selecting amendments and the way in which the party responds to amendments that have been set out and the different amendments that have been set out. But look, there is a wider issue here, which is the devastating things that are happening in the Middle East at the moment, and the real deep concern and distress there is. We have seen 4,000 Palestinian children killed in Gaza. Hostages are still being held. There's obviously a humanitarian crisis at the moment, and I think that everyone wants to see an end to the violence and a proper measures to address the humanitarian crisis that are in place.
And we talked about that at great length on the programme this morning, but I'm asking you a specific question. If there is a vote on a ceasefire in the House of Commons this week, will Keir Starmer sack front benchers who vote for a ceasefire, which is different to his own position?
And I understand, and you asked me that question, Laura, and as I've said, I can't preempt the process that we will go through with the selection of amendments that hasn't yet taken place by the Speaker, and the Labour Party will then set out its
elegant
response
way of avoiding
to
the question.
amendments that are selected. But I'm trying to address the wider issue because, I can't answer the process question for you, but what I can do is to talk about the wider issue. Keir Starmer has obviously set out the position, the Labour Party's position, as part of the Chatham House speech that he made. You will have also heard David Lammy and Lisa Nandy call for much stronger humanitarian action, including civilian protection, because so many children's lives are being lost. It is absolutely devastating what's happening, and we've seen some of the consequences too with the hospitals not having fuel. It's why we've called for some kind of immediate suspension of hostilities to get a humanitarian pause in place. There has been some progress, but the short pauses are just not enough, and we've got to have the space both to make sure that there can be the humanitarian aid and the food, so to have the civilian protection measures put in place as well, and space too for further negotiations around hostage release as well.
We must leave it there, but thank you for joining us this morning, not least because I know you have to dash off to your local Remembrance service in your constituency there in Kuenssberg. Now let's take you now to the scene of our national remembrance, where for more than 100 years veterans have been joined by members of the royal family, senior politicians and the military at the Cenotaph in Whitehall. Sophie Rayworth is there for us this morning.
Good morning from the Cenotaph, where almost 10,000 people are getting ready on Horse Guards Parade to come out here shortly and take their places on Whitehall ahead of this morning's march past, young and old taking part. Among them, about a dozen World War II veterans, the youngest now in their late 90s. And you can see some of the members of the public who've been queuing since the early hours just to make sure that they get their places here so that they too can pay their respects. Well, I'm joined right now by two women, two sisters who served in the RAF, who are taking part in the march past this morning. Good morning, Michelle Rozak and Sue Fisher.
Good morning.
What does it mean to both of you to take part in the march past together?
It's remembering the people that have gone before us, that have made it possible for us to do the jobs that we did within the Air Force, and it also is the camaraderie that we feel when we all meet up year on, year in, and the people that can't march because of disability or age, as well as the ones that have gone before.
And so you joined you were a nurse.
That's
and
right,
Michelle,
yes.
you were pretty pioneering, weren't you? Because you joined a decade later in 1990. You were an aircraft engineer, and there were very few women doing that.
Yes, when I joined up, I could count the ladies going through Kuenssberg doing their trade training on one hand. But now it's opened up, and there's so many young ladies going through and really carrying the banner for equal jobs, equal pay, and equal opportunities in the Air Force.
What is it like when you take part in the march past? Because you've both done it now a few times, haven't you?
Yeah.
But it's a really charged moment, isn't it, for people?
It is, isn't it?
You can feel the emotion. Everybody stood there to attention, we march off, and just the swell of pride that you feel as you're going down, it does get to you. A lot of the ladies you'll see, they'll have a tear in their eyes that come past the Cenotaph, and it's just so important to be here to remember everybody who's been before.
It's also about connections, isn't it? A lot of the veterans over the years have said to me, this is the one day, the one moment
I know.
when they can be with people who they can just be completely open with.
It's like-minded, it's a different sense of humour that we have, and it's great. You meet new people, you meet people that you haven't seen for decades. It's not just years. In our case, it's decades. We haven't reconnected. But you meet them, and it's as if you only said goodbye to them last week. It is fantastic.
And is there huge support from the crowds who are growing right now on Whitehall? Well, we'll let you go and get ready, but thank you both very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More of that later on BBC One. Now, you remember, we've talked so much on this programme about the dangers and excitements of the world online. The government's finally brought in a huge new set of laws trying to put safety at the top of the list. The job has been given to Ofcom, the watchdog that for years has looked after what's on our screens.
That was the chart, that was Top of the Pops.
Ofcom's been checking what's on the box since the early noughties.
Was the last #1 of 2002.
Their job since has been keeping an eye on this lot.
You can track him, mate, but not mine.
No.
See you later. Sorry, can't do this.
Absolutely.
And looking into complaints about when and where politicians pop up on screen.
So why did you do it?
Why did it?
Yeah, why are you here?
But now the regulators got to take on the wild west of the internet too. Good luck with that. Well, the man who's leading the charge as chair of Ofcom is Lord Michael Grade, who's here in the studio for the first time. Welcome to you. Now, one of the main aims of this huge new bit of legislation is to make sure that children are protected online, including from content that isn't illegal but might be harmful. Now, this principle is at the core of it. So can you give us a brief sense of what that means?
Well, the legal but harmful sections of the bill were removed during the parliamentary process. What we're concentrating on is reducing harm for children online, which is about strangers being able to contact them. It's about seeing stuff that they shouldn't be able to see, and so on. So the big push is to reduce harm for children.
And how on earth do you actually do that if stuff isn't straightforwardly against the law?
Well, we only deal with illegal. We only deal with illegal harms. That's the core of the bill. It's our job is to make sure that the tech companies themselves, the platforms themselves, take absolute control and have systems and processes in place to stop it, and they will be held to account for that. We can't possibly control and monitor all the content. As we're talking, thousands of bits of stuff is going on here. We just got to reduce the harm, and I think parents and anybody with children wants to see that happen.
There are some areas where the law is very clear, but there are these grey areas, and you've just said, you know, you can't possibly get to everything. So I would like to show you something that is seen online that's hugely popular. This is a video of an online influencer called Myron Gaines. Now, he hosts a dating and fitness podcast that's aimed at men, but we know also that a lot of young people are seeing this kind of content. Let's have a look.
If I arm you guys with the tools that you need so you can deal with these modern day women, I'm happy with that. Because you know what? I'd rather be called a misogynist. I'd rather that, right, be called names than one of you guys killing yourself over some.
Now that's deeply offensive to many people.
It's horrible.
You're then making a face.
Yes.
Listening to that. The Myron Gaines tag on TikTok has over 500 million views. Now, with the new powers that you have, can you tell parents this morning that their kids aren't going to see that? That's not going to pop up on their phones?
I sincerely hope so, yes. It'll be down to us to lean on the tech companies, for the tech companies themselves to take responsibility for stuff like that. Children should not be seeing that. That is so grossly misogynistic and offensive. It shouldn't be there.
So how will you stop it happening now?
Well, under the powers of the Act, we have the powers to go into these tech companies and examine their algorithms, how they're controlling the content. They have to take responsibility for this kind of stuff, and that's clearly unacceptable. And they will have to satisfy us and the law that they're taking steps to stop horrible stuff like this.
But what will that actually mean in practice? Because you're saying the tech companies will have to satisfy you that they're doing enough to take it down. And if you are a parent of a kid who's been watching grim material on their phone, if you are the friend of somebody who's maybe suffers from anorexia, who's been looking at that kind of content on their phone, what can you actually do as an individual citizen? Phone Michael Grade, phone up Ofcom?
We will make sure that the tech companies have got. It's very important that they understand the complaints that are coming in. So complaints will go to the tech companies, and they will again have to satisfy us that their complaints procedures are effective and that they are taking notice of the complaints.
But in practice, what will that mean? Because ensuring a complaints process is effective, you know, are there time limits on how quickly they will have to take things down? How do they actually satisfy you that they're paying any attention?
What will happen is that when there's a horror, we will go in, we will talk to them, we will see what they've done about it. How quickly was it brought to their attention? How quickly did they act? Did they act responsibly? Did they act in line with what the Act requires of them? It's pretty serious stuff. And the big tech companies are ready for this.
They are certainly ready for it, and they've hired thousands of people to try to deal with all of these things. Will you force them to change the algorithms, so the formulas that decide not just what content is suggested to people, but also how often it's pushed and blasted at them? Because it's not always about the content, it's also about the frequency with which stuff gets pushed to people.
For the first time, the Act gives us the power to go in and demand the background, the underlying information, the codes, the algorithms, everything else. We'll be able to get in and see what they're doing. But what we're trying to do is get them to take, and what the Act expects of them, and what we expect of them, is to take responsibility for the harm that they cause or that is caused on their platforms.
So what does that mean, take responsibility for the harm that's caused?
Through their risk assessments, through the codes that we will introduce, statutory codes, through all the mechanisms that are in the Act that enable us to hold them to account.
Do you think that people, particularly young people, get addicted to social media platforms?
I think there is an addictive quality, yes, definitely. We're all, there are people watching this program now who are also texting or WhatsApping or whatever they're doing. That's an inevitable part of the internet. But there are huge values in the internet as well. We mustn't lose sight of that.
People have been concerned as well with hateful images and hate speech online, particularly right now with what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, that's illegal. That they won't be allowed to do that anymore.
But do you anticipate that you will crack down on platforms like X, formerly known as Twitter, for hosting that kind of material?
If they allow illegal content onto their services, they will be in trouble. Yes, definitely.
And do you have concerns about how Elon Musk has run X since he took over?
I don't have a view about Elon Musk.
You don't have a view about Elon Musk?
No, I've never met him. I don't have a view about him. They will have to abide by the regulations that are in place and that have been voted on by Parliament.
Isn't this all, though, a bit like David and Goliath? You know, you've got these new powers, you've hired 350 people to work on this, but we know big platforms like Meta, X, huge companies like that, have got thousands and thousands and thousands of people working for them. Many of them fought against this legislation tooth and nail. Are you really confident that you're actually going to be able to make a difference?
Yes, because we're not the only country regulating. They've got this issue with the European Commission, with Brussels, so they've got this issue in Australia. They've got it, that more and more countries are waking up to the fact that the days of the free-for-all are over. But in the end, these platforms have a reputation to maintain. Without that reputation, advertisers are not going to want their brands on their platform. So there's a lot for them to lose if they don't behave themselves.
So you say the days of the free-for-all on the internet are over. Some people in this country think on TV, and particularly in news, there's more of a free-for-all than there used to be.
That's a neat segue.
I will take that as a compliment, perhaps. There is been a proliferation, an exciting proliferation for many people, of news providers in this country. There's one particular channel, GB News, that many politicians are concerned about. Other politicians are taking money from to present shows. There are 4 active Conservative politicians hosting shows on GB News, and the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is also soon joining their ranks. Now, you don't have to be a brain of Britain to work out that that channel has a clear political leaning. Is that fair?
They have to abide by the rules of impartiality, due impartiality, fairness, accuracy, and so on. As do I think we regulate, or we license something like 2,000 broadcasters. The rules of GB News are the same as they are for this programme, for the BBC, for everybody.
But the question is whether the rules still apply.
I have to be a little bit
when
careful
the world
here
is so
because we've got 14 investigations going on at the moment following complaints about GB News. I have to be a little bit careful not to prejudice the outcome.
But there's a question of principle, though, isn't there? Because the Ofcom rules, you say they are the same across the industry, but the industry has changed so much that some people look at it and think, well, hang on a minute, organisations like GB News are running rings around the regulator that's sticking to rules that were put in place in another era.
I wouldn't recognise the phrase running rings around them. I think they've been in breach, I think, about 4 times so far.
But are you concerned generically, in a general sense, not just as somebody who's at Ofcom, but as one of the most successful long-time TV executives, do you have worries about an increasing level of polarisation and commentary?
I have worries about freedom of speech and freedom of expression on the airwaves. That's what concerns Ofcom. You know, we have to balance complaints against freedom of speech. Freedom of speech means say what you like within the law, and on broadcasting, licensed broadcasters, that means saying what you want within the rules that Ofcom has to uphold.
But do you really think, with such a changed landscape, for good or ill, that having the same rules that have been in place for such a long time is the right approach?
I think the rules have stood us in very good stead. They have increased the range of choice in news outlets and current affairs. I mean, GB News it calls itself GB News, but it's more of a current affairs. You know, there are political chat shows that go on BBC News, which is a kind of new format. We want to see a plurality of choice and freedom of expression on the airways. We don't want to be in the business of telling broadcasters, licensees, who they can employ, who they can't employ. There are rules about elections and politicians at election time. They're very strong, clear rules. But that's not our job. Our job is to ensure within the rules, within the rules of due impartiality, that there is plenty of choice and freedom of expression on the airwaves. That means some people will always be offended by stuff, but there's no rule that says you can't be offended.
Absolutely not. Michael Gray, thank you very much for coming in this morning. We love political chat. We can never get enough of it here. Now, let's whiz back to 9 o'clock. And the big and serious question that we began with this morning, after stirring up political controversy over the protests, we were discussing if Suella Braverman's comments, the Home Secretary, had made divisions worse.
I think there have been concerns sometimes that people have felt at liberty. Let me just finish this one thought, if I may. At liberty, perhaps because they haven't seen swift enough action to carry on going out, carrying these banners, singing these chants and breaking laws which were in place to prevent racial hatred.
Nadine Dorries, you were the Cabinet Minister who was at the beginning of the online safety bill that we were just beginning talking about there with Michael Gray. Are you happy with where it's ended up?
No, I'm not. And you know, that video which you showed at the beginning of your interview, actually the fundamental issue with that video was misogyny, and I'm afraid misogyny is no longer covered in the bill. It has been watered down to the point where vulnerable adults, young vulnerable adults and teenagers will be subjected to those very harmful algorithms that you spoke about, which will direct them towards very harmful places in the internet, suicide chat rooms, eating disorder chat rooms, those very harms that we know are resulting in a rise in suicides among the 16 to 24 age group, in the massive rise we've seen in young girls with eating disorders. And I'm afraid the bill, and I just want to say actually while I'm here, you know, I did take the bill into a good place. There were people working on that, like Dame Caroline Downage before me, against, you know, fierce opposition within the department. We did get it to a good place.
It was a big and noisy debate, and I know we'll come back to these issues in the show in the months to come. Shami, we asked Yvette Cooper there about the quote that you mentioned, that briefing from a senior Labour source. Labour has clarified that off-the-record quote did not come from the leader's office, but were you happy with what Yvette Cooper said about that.
Well, I'm glad that she said it was, I mean, she was very clear that it was offensive
and condemned it.
And condemned it. That's very important leadership from her as the Shadow Home Secretary. I mean, the murky world of off-the-record briefings, you know, as I say, Nadine wrote a book about it. And by the way, after that excellent interview with Lord Grade, we need to remember that Nadine also exposed in her book that when she appointed him, or she recommended his appointment to the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, shadowy forces and sources actually tried to change the recommendation on the submission to the Prime Minister.
Well, I didn't think at the beginning of this morning that we'd find so many common causes between Shami Chakrabarti and Nadine Dorries. You never quite know what you're going to
all these things are possible.
People can speak
all in the trenches
across the political divides. Kim Darroch, I just wonder, I know that in the end, you know, your career was a victim in some ways of a big leak. What do you think of all this kind of stuff?
I speak only from very general knowledge of all of this, I promise you. But I do think that the big platforms need very strong regulation, very tough regulation. And from what Nadine has said, I wonder if this bill, which I haven't followed in detail, has been watered down too much. And I do think that they can afford it. You know, they're making vast sums of money. So hiring the people to police the internet properly seems to me thing we can reasonably ask of them.
Okay, well, all three of you, thank you so much. You've covered huge amounts of ground on a very busy day. We'll see what happens in the coming days to Suella Braverman. We'll see also look out for the judgment from the courts on Wednesday, when the government will be told whether or not flights to deport migrants to Rwanda, Suella Braverman's dream, can come true. By the time we meet again next Sunday, there might be a new reshuffled cabinet. Rishi Sunak might have tried to grab back the initiative and send Suella Braverman packing. Or maybe the Prime Minister's natural caution might actually leave her in place. We will see. Either way, the perhaps unnecessary political furore of the serious questions around the protests may have dented Downing Street's authority again. And with the polls where they are, they can ill afford that. In a second here on BBC One, there'll be live coverage of our service of national remembrance. Later, I'll be heading to the weekend edition of Newscast. That'll be on BBC Sounds later. But you all know, every now and then, on a special occasion, we like to bring you something that isn't politics. It's just indescribably gorgeous and goes beyond words. Today, it is the turn of musician Vikingur Olafsson, who's recently recorded Bach's Goldberg Variations. You will know them when you hear them. He's recorded them to huge acclaim. So we asked him to play the beginning of that incredible work on this important day, just for you. It is beautiful. So until next week, we wish you a very good bye.
Hello from the newscast studio.
So, what stories are we going to talk about today?
That is a chunky one. We need a guest who can really dig into this.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hello.
To get you ready for today's conversations. Newscast. Listen every day on BBC Sounds.
Join us for an evening of inspiring stories, bold innovation and incredible performances, all coming together to celebrate the Earthshot Prize. The solutions needed to repair and restore our planet are within reach.
The Earthshot Prize, today at 5:20 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Now marking Remembrance Sunday, we're live from the Cenotaph in Whitehall. Audio-described commentary is available on the red button and iPlayer. Uninterrupted commentary-free coverage is also available on the iPlayer. Here on BBC One, we join David Dimbleby.
Good morning from London on this annual Remembrance Sunday. The Sunday closest to Armistice Day, November the 11th, when fighting in the First World War ended in 1918. A day to remember those killed and injured in war and the families and the friends who grieve. 1 million British and Commonwealth service people died in the First World War, 500,000 in the Second. The numbers trip dangerously off the tongue. And since those wars, barely a year without our forces being engaged fighting somewhere in the world, the horror of war and millions of families in distress brought home this Remembrance Sunday by the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East and in Africa. On Horse Guards Parade, 10,000 veterans of war have been assembling to take part in the march past the Cenotaph, which is later this morning, after the 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock and the service of remembrance that follows it. And on Whitehall, those taking part in the formal act of commemoration, they're starting to assemble, the mass bands and the pipers who play the same solemn music as has been heard here every year for nearly 100 years. There'll be on each side of the Cenotaph members of the armed forces representing sea, land, air and the civilian services. And the Household Cavalry will soon be taking up their position. They're just coming down Whitehall now. Royal Marine Band, leading the first of the forces that will be around the Cenotaph. And then here, of course, at the Cenotaph too, the key to this formal part of the ceremony, the King and other members of the royal family will come. They'll be leading politicians, including the Prime Minister, senior officers of the armed forces, representatives of the Commonwealth, all taking their places before 11 o'clock. And the 2-minute silence. Then they'll lay their wreaths. Following that, the brief service of remembrance taken by the Bishop of London. And that's followed by the great march past the Cenotaph of 10,000 veterans. That's all to come. But for now, let's join Sophie Rayworth, who's on Whitehall.
I am here with thousands of people who have been queuing here since first thing this morning, just to make sure that they get their places right here in front of the Cenotaph. It's raining right now, the first time that's happened for a very long time on Remembrance Sunday, but it's not putting anybody off coming here to show their support and pay tribute. I'll be talking to some of the people taking part in the march past today. Among them, a World War II veteran who is 101 years old, and also a young man who's 13 who lost his father in Afghanistan. Humbling and moving, as always.
This year is the 70th anniversary. Each year sees one of these anniversaries of the end of the Korean War. After Japan's defeat in the Second World War, Russia and the United States effectively partitioned the Korean peninsula, and the two halves went to war in 1950. 60,000 members of the British Armed Forces joined the United Nations in defending South Korea, and over 1,000 British servicemen lost their lives. And there will be people marching here today thinking back to that Korean War. And among them, for the first time since the war ended, which is now 92-year-old Bill Hall has travelled down from Scotland. He's going to be here for Remembrance Sunday for the first time.
I was a baker. I was called up for national service in 1951. And I landed in the Black Watch. And that's it, I went off to Korea. Half first it was on the boat, said, "Where's this Korea about?" And I said, "How can I tell you?" 80% of them, I would say, were national service. Landed in Busan. The shell fire was worse in Korea than anything else. And I met one of the chaps that had been in the 1939-45 war. And he said, "I've never had shell fire like this." And that's when I was blowing up. I heard this roar, and I knew it was something horrible. If the shell had landed about another 9 inches this way, we wouldn't have been here today. I sat on the hill saying, "What the hang am I doing here?" We were there for about a week. The Chinese attacked the Americans, and we were told to get up there and help. That was the Battle of the Hook. Me and John Ricky, the chap I was on the guns with, being told from up there that this machine gun's got to be disbanded. So one of you's got to do that. The sergeant, he says, "I'll toss the coin." So one of you's got to shout. I said, "I'll shout." So I shouted heads, and it came down heads. And I said, "Well, I'll stay here." The next morning, this sergeant come along and says, "I've got something to tell you. Your mate's just been killed." And I'm standing in there thinking, God, that could have been me. Why am I here? And they're dead. It's just the luck of the draw with a toss of a coin. It was a forgotten war, and now it's coming to the fore. But I still remember them.
Bill Hall, 92, who'll be marching with the Black Watch Association later on after the service here at the Cenotaph. The members of the armed forces, the civilian services, continuing to take their place. They have to be patient. They stay here for an hour and a half, 2 hours before they're able to march past, whatever the weather. In London today, it's a slight drizzle, but it's not heavy rain. But they stand there, a few umbrellas going up. They'll be able to see and take part in the service before the march past. The band's coming into position, the Royal Navy and the band of the Royal Marines, the Royal Navy lining up on one side of the Cenotaph. Many of those who are on parade will have seen active service in Iraq and Afghanistan themselves, and they'll be here for the reason that they want to celebrate, remember some private connection to the act of remembrance. And one of them is Captain Joseph Main. He's with Sophie Rayworth.
He is indeed Captain Joseph Mayne, you have a very particular, poignant reason for being here today. You're a serving member of the armed forces, but your father was killed, wasn't he, when you were just 5 years old, a tornado pilot in Iraq?
Yeah, so he was deployed in operations in Iraq in 2003, where he was unfortunately killed in action alongside his navigator, David Williams, Flight Lieutenant David Williams. So yeah, I lost him at a very early age. Yeah.
What does it mean to you to be here today?
It means it's very special to be here, you know, as a serving member and to honour the memory of my father. But it's also special to remember the people who have lost their lives in the service, as well as the people who have been wounded and have come back with all sorts of horrors from war, but also the families as well. The families of people who never came back. It's important we remember and put our arm around those people today.
It's a very, very important day for the families, isn't it? And you, when you speak about your father's death, you say that in one sense it wasn't a negative impact on your life. It's actually given you a sense of drive, a sense of purpose. Explain that.
So it's obviously a tragedy for it to happen in the first place, but it's given me that drive that I needed to succeed in life and to be the best I can be, you know, to honour his memory, and also the support my mum gave me from a very young age. It's important that I do the absolute best I can to be who I am today, and working hard, going through Sandhurst and getting into the army was a big part of, you know, I can thank him to say that he drove me to that.
And when you look around at all these faces, I always find it extraordinary. There's the stories, the history,
so
the
much,
gathering people. It's an incredible atmosphere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the amount of experience that's just here today, and everyone that's come along to support them as well. It's brilliant to see, and it's good to have the support.
Captain Joseph Mayne, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Joseph Mayne with Sophie. One of Britain's most recent major military engagements followed the destruction in 2001 of the World Trade Center in New York, when Britain joined the United States and their allies in war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. That war lasted 20 years, and in that time 150,000 British personnel served. Nearly 500 of them died. Among them, Lance Corporal Liam Tasker of the Royal Army Veterinary Corps, whose mother and sister recall his life.
He was known as BLT, Big Liam Tasker. Liam was into mischief all the time.
Dad actually made a joke once that the rest of us were surplus to requirement because Liam was the favourite.
He joined the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers when he was 16. He loved the army, didn't he? He also had a love for the dogs, so he trained to be a dog handler. That was his passion, he loved it, didn't he? Liam and Theo got put together, they just seemed to hit it off from day one. They had the record for the most finds IEDs at the time in Afghanistan.
Lie down. Good boy.
I was so proud of them.
I didn't realise the danger of what they were doing. It was something that I'd grown up with.
He came home in January. I don't know if it was instinct or something there. And I gave him a big hug and I said to him, you know, I was really worried about leaving him. And he said, don't be stupid, Mum. I'll be home in 6 weeks. 1st of March 2011. The Padre and that had been trying to get hold of me. I went, it's Liam, isn't it? And he went, yeah.
She was wailing. I've never heard her scream like it. I was sitting and I remember having my fingers in my ears.
When we got told Liam had been killed, Theo was still alive at the time. And the Padre came back about 3 hours later and he said to me, we've got some sad news for you. Theo was just had an unexplained seizure and he sadly passed. I will say Theo died of a broken heart. This is a letter that Liam wrote to us in case anything happened. I've had a fantastic life. I've got the best family in the world. You'll always be in my heart and I'll see you on the other side. My love forever and always, Liam. A man will travel many miles while chasing his dreams, and by God, I believe Liam did these miles and chased his dreams. We asked for Theo's ashes to be repatriated. I took a lot of comfort in the fact that they were going to be together. Theo's actually at his feet with him. Liam got his mention in dispatches for his bravery the year after.
He loved what he was doing. I was so proud of what he did and what he gave.
Liam was 26 when he was killed, and Nicola turned 26 in March. I thought, God, she's just a kid.
It's difficult, but and then to know that you'll be older than your older sibling, obviously, isn't nice.
People seem to think time heals. Time doesn't heal. That's why Remembrance Day and things like that are really important to us, because you don't want your child to be forgotten.
Time doesn't heal. Well, I'm joined by Andy Allen, who is marching for the third time today. It's a particularly difficult day, isn't it, today, for the families who have lost people, those particularly recently?
I mean, Sophie, families never forget. And on days like this, it really does heighten the sensitivities to it all. It is a time to remember, and for families, it just brings it all back, and it's very raw indeed.
You're marching with REME, the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers.
Yes, I am.
What does it mean to you to be here today?
For me, it connects the dots. The Caribbean sort of fought in the First World War, and they fought in the Second World War. And there's generations like myself that have gone through, and so we've got to connect the dots from the past to the present and to the future. And it is all about making sure that there is a history, making sure that people know, making sure people remember that British Caribbeans actually did fight for Queen and Country and for King and Country throughout the period.
The Commonwealth soldiers lost their lives in huge numbers just in World War I and World War II alone. It's like 1.5 million, more than that.
Absolutely. And that history, that knowledge needs to be recognised, and it's coming through now. And that Commonwealth sacrifice they wanted to give to the country, and we mustn't forget that. And on days like this, the nation really gets it. They really do see us all marching, not just for the Commonwealth, but it is for the whole nation.
And your father was of the Windrush generation.
Yes, he was, yeah.
You yourself in the 1980s went to Sandhurst. You were really breaking the mould then, weren't you?
Sophie, when I went to Sandhurst in 1984, I was black British, only officer cadet at Sandhurst. I mean, there were other intakes. So yes, I was breaking the mould, Sophie, yeah.
And being here today, the camaraderie amongst all the veterans who are lining up now.
Oh, let me tell you, the banter that is going on in between the old soldiers and actually some young soldiers is marvellous. And it does help the healing over time. These types of occasions make people remember comrades, but also the get-together, and the banter is just fantastic.
Andy Allen, thank you so much.
Andy Allen there. And if you're just joining us in Whitehall, this morning's ceremony will begin shortly. The bands will be playing the traditional music, and after that, at 11 o'clock, the 2-minute silence, and then the King laying a wreath on behalf of the nation. We'll be live on air here on BBC One until 12:45. Meanwhile, you can find audio-described commentary for the blind and partially sighted via the red button and iPlayer. And uninterrupted commentary-free coverage is also available on the iPlayer. So here, with the RAF in position, the hollow square is now almost complete. A hollow square, originally a fighting formation, but also a formation dating back centuries, echoing the drumhead ceremony when soldiers on the battlefield would parade on the 3 sides of a hollow square before going into battle. And the 4th side, roughly where the Cenotaph is today, would be piled with drums. You may have seen it at the Festival of Remembrance last night at the Albert Hall, to make an altar, and that would be draped with regimental colours for the service. the Household Cavalry, dismounted regiment of the Blues and Royals, who form the King's Life Guard. The 1st Battalion Welsh Guards are here, forming the Guard of Honour, led by William Harris. Himself has seen service in Afghanistan. Blues and Royals, led by Captain Stone. Royal Air Force, represented by, among others, the King's Colour Squadron, 63 Squadron, the RAF Regiment, and Princess Mary's Royal Air Force Nursing Service, and the RAF led by Squadron Leader Bull, who played an active part in the evacuation of Afghanistan in 2021. And then the uniformed civilian services. A long list: the Fleet Auxiliary, the Coast Guard, the Police, British Transport Police, Fire and Rescue, Ambulance, British Red Cross, Prison and Probation Services, Northern Ireland Prison Service, and the Women's Voluntary Service. And then there are over 100 representatives of the Royal Navy, representing all arms of the service: the Surface Flotilla, the Submarine Fleet, the Fleet Air Arm, the Royal Marines, 4-2 Commando, and the Queen Alexandra Naval Nursing Service, led by Lieutenant Commander Geoffrey Howells. The sailors from all kinds of ships: Heron, Seahawk, Drake, Excellent, Collingwood, Raleigh, I can't name them all. And the 42 Commando Royal Marines and the Queen Alexandra's Royal Naval Nursing Service. The bands form the south side here, drawn from the band and buglers of the Royal Marines, the mass bands of the Household Division, pipes of the 1st Battalion, Irish Guards, the trumpeters, and the central band of the Royal Air Force, led by Lieutenant Colonel David Barringer, the commanding officer of the band. Rule Britannia, followed by Heart of Oak, and now The Minstrel Boy, Till the War is Gone. Men of Harlech. Senior Drum Major Gareth Chambers orders the mass bands to stand at ease, and the music is taken up by the pipes of the 1st Battalion Irish Guards and the Skyboat Song. Next, Isle of Beauty, a 19th century song with the words, "Absence makes the heart grow fonder, Isle of Beauty, fare thee well." Oft in the stilly night, the poet remembers the friends I've seen around me fall like leaves in wintry weather. It was first played when George V unveiled the Cenotaph in 1920, and on that year he made a pilgrimage to the continent to see the battlefields and the cemeteries of the First World War, saying that he asked himself whether there could be any more powerful advocate for peace than these massed multitudes of silent witnesses to the desolation of war. pipes and drums now play Flowers of the Forest, which was part of the service at Westminster Abbey in 1920 for the Unknown Warrior. It's been played every year since then. Perhaps the most famous of Elgar's Enigma variations, always played here at the Cenotaph, Nimrod, depiction of friendship and comradeship. When I am laid in earth, forget my fate. Dido's Lament. Playing as we wait for the procession of clergy and choir who will lead the Bishop of London, Dame Sarah Mullally, out for their part in the service. Next on parade, the Major General's procession. Major General James Bowder of London District, the General Officer Commanding, the Chief of Staff Colonel Stone, and the ADC Captain Brewer. Next out onto Whitehall, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, leader of the Labour Party, the Scottish National Party, the Liberal Democrats, Democratic Unionists, the Speaker of the House of Commons and of the House of Lords, and many members of the government, and former Prime Ministers with them. They're followed by representatives of the Crown dependencies and UK overseas territories, Guernsey, Jersey, the Isle of Man, Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, the Falklands, Gibraltar, Montserrat, St Helena, Ascension and Tristan da Cunha, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. And then the Chief of the Defence Staff, the First Sea Lord, the Chief of the General Staff, and the Chief of the Air Staff. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, Admiral Sir Ben Key, General Sir Patrick Sanders, and Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton. And with them the Merchant Navy and Fishing Fleet representative, Geoffrey Nutt, William Lead of the Air Transport Auxiliary Association, Kevin Stevens for the Civilian Services. And now the nearly 50 High Commissioners from the Commonwealth countries, the equivalent of ambassadors in effect, including the older members of the Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, Pakistan, members from East Africa and the Caribbean. Most of these countries, even the smallest, sent men to fight and women to fight in one or both of the two world wars. Just a few of the recent members of the Commonwealth, Gabon, Togo, Rwanda, Mozambique, who are here, didn't have any links with Britain during those first two wars. Over 20 representatives of many different faiths and beliefs take their place. And at 3 minutes or so to go before 11 o'clock, everyone is now in their place, except for the members of the royal party. His Majesty the King, followed by the Prince of Wales, Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, the Princess Royal, and their equerries, with a minute until 11 o'clock come to take their place to salute and later to lay the first of the wreaths. His Majesty the King laying the first wreath on behalf of the nation. The second wreath is laid on behalf of the Queen by her equerry, Major Plunkett. The Prince of Wales steps forward with his wreath. Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh. And Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. And a wreath now laid on behalf of the Duke of Kent, who's not here this year, by his equerry, Captain Hopkins. Now the leaders of the political parties, beginning with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party. Stephen Flynn, leader of the Scottish National Party in the House of Commons, laying a wreath on behalf of the SNP and of Plaid Cymru. Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson for the Democratic Unionist Party. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. And he's followed by the Speaker of the House of Lords. The Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, James Cleverly, and the Secretary of State for the Home Department, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, laying wreaths on behalf of the intelligence agencies, the Security Service, Government Communications Headquarters at GCHQ. The Crown dependencies and UK overseas territories now, from Guernsey, Jersey, the Isle of Man, Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, Montserrat, St Helena, Ascension and Tristan da Cunha, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. Now the High Commissioners of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Sri Lanka, Ghana, and Malaysia. followed by the High Commissioners of Nigeria, Cyprus, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, and usually Kenya would be here, but they're not here today. 45,000 men from British East Africa lost their lives in the war. All these countries played a part. They're followed by the High Commissioners of Malawi, of Malta, the George Cross Island, of Zambia, the Gambia, Singapore, Guyana, Botswana, Lesotho, and Barbados. The contributions of many of the countries in Africa, not well recorded, unlike those of soldiers from Britain and the old Commonwealth. Very often not given a grave, just buried, and even now, many, many years later, they're still trying to identify how many people gave their lives in the First and Second World War. Now Mauritius, Eswatini, the former Swaziland, Fiji, Bangladesh, the Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, the Seychelles, the Commonwealth of Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. And the final group of High Commissioners from Belize, Antigua and Barbuda, the Maldives, St. Christopher and Nevis, Brunei Dar es Salaam, Namibia, Cameroon, Mozambique, Rwanda, Gabon, and Togo. Remembering 15,000 soldiers from West Indies regiments from the Caribbean who saw action in France and Palestine and Egypt and Italy during the First World War. 2,500 died. And the High Commissioners are followed by the Ambassador of Ireland, Martin Fraser, and the Ambassador of Nepal, Gyan Chandra Acharya, laying a wreath on behalf of the Gurkhas who fought so valiantly and still do today in World War I and service chiefs, Chief of the Defence Staff and the First Sea Lord, Chief of the General Staff and the Chief of the Air Staff. the all-important representatives of the Merchant Navy, who played such a vital role in the Second World War in keeping Britain supplied, of the Air Transport Auxiliary Association of the Civilian Services, Geoffrey Nutt, William Lead, and Chief Constable Gavin Stevens. And that marks the end of the formal wreath-laying and the beginning of the service with the Bishop of London.
O Almighty God, grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honour to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country and of the Crown, may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude that, forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to speak for rest, to labour and not to ask for any award, save that of knowing that we do thy will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace this day and always. Amen.
the Queen leaving the balcony where she was watching as her wreath was laid, and the royal party leaving the Cenotaph at Whitehall, going back into the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and they'll be followed by all the others who came out for this, including, you may have spotted, a host of former Prime Ministers, John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, all here. But first, the religious procession leaves. Well, as they leave Whitehall, and next will be the wreath laying by the Royal British Legion and their representatives, let's rejoin Sophie Rayworth.
Well, I'm joined by a very special gentleman here. He is one of just 12 or so World War II veterans. This is Bernard Madden, 101 years old.
Yeah.
And this is your third time here at the Cenotaph, isn't it? What's it like here for you when you come back here?
Emotional.
You didn't come, did you, until you were in your mid-80s, until you were about 85?
Yeah.
And what was it? You found it very overwhelming, didn't you?
Yeah. I walked it.
You walked it then?
Yeah.
You've got your lovely granddaughter here who's going to be taking you today. Now, you're marching with the Green Howards, aren't you?
Yeah.
And tell us, you've got your medals with you, but you've also got some history that you're bringing with you, which is wonderful to see, because that is a photograph of you, Bernard, isn't it?
Yeah.
I hope people at home can see that.
Yeah.
You were 21 years old.
Round about that.
That's 80 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
80
or 90,
years.
one of the two.
And you fought in Burma, didn't you?
Yeah.
And something here which you've got as well with you is extraordinary. A passenger ticket there. The passenger ticket that you have here, which was from 1946. Do you remember that journey home? That was when you left Burma.
Yeah, it was in the Liberator bomber.
An American bomber.
Bomber. And then we switched to an English Liberator.
Amazing. It's such a long time ago.
That was in 46 when I was getting demobbed.
And you have been getting an awful lot of attention here today, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm not used to it.
But everyone wants to come and talk to you, don't they? They all want to come and shake your hand.
Course. Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Emotional. You see, it brings back the memories when we were going on, what do you call it, on...
It must just bring back a lot of memories, I think.
Yeah,
just
my memories and all that good. But what gets me is going back to when we were in Burma and some of the lads never got home.
Is that who you think about when you go past the Cenotaph?
Yeah. Because they fought for the country and they never came back. And it was terrible when somebody comes up to me and say, oh, you know, could be Joe. Joe didn't make it, and it really hurt.
And you remember that vividly all these years later.
Yeah.
Well, Bernard, you're going to be leading the column for the Green Howards, aren't you, with your granddaughter?
Yeah.
It's amazing to see you here. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's just...
Official ceremony, so to speak, is concluded now, and the Royal British Legion, in effect, takes over the events here. They organise the march past, and they represent all the veterans' charities that are here. And first of all, they lay wreaths, the first one by the President of the Royal British Legion, Vice Admiral Sir Clive Johnson. Clive Johnson took over presidency of the British Legion in May this year. He comes from a family that served in the Royal Navy and the Army over many generations. He retired as a Vice Admiral from his final role as commander of NATO's Allied Maritime Command in 2019. The Royal British Legion, on whose behalf that wreath was laid, is actually the largest of all the UK charities devoted to supporting the armed forces communities. And they organised this march past. They also organised Poppy Day. The next wreath is laid by Keith Ridley of the Royal Naval Association. He joined the Royal Navy when he was 16 and has been chairman for the last 7 years. And like all the associations we'll be hearing about during the march past, the Royal Naval Association is there to keep former sailors across the world in touch with each other, give help where they can. Sir James Everard, on behalf of the Army Benevolent Fund, the Soldiers' Charity as it's called. He took over as president of this after a long career in the Army. He was in the 17th, 21st Lancers, commanded the Queen's Royal Lancers, 20th Armoured Brigade, served in the Pentagon all over the place. And now Air Commodore Stu Stirrett, on behalf of the Royal Air Forces Association. He was a helicopter pilot, retired this year after 38 years. Served in Northern Ireland, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now devotes himself to the work of the RAF Association, again providing support for former members of the services. General Lord Richards, Lord David Richards of Herstmonceux, Grand President is called of the Royal Commonwealth Ex-Services League, and a former Chief of the Defence Staff, distinguished military career. He was commissioned in the Royal Artillery, commanded the 3rd Regiment, Royal Horse Artillery. He's commanded in Afghanistan in July 2006. And he'll be joining the 3rd Regiment, Royal Horse Artillery during the march past later. And now, Lieutenant Commander Martin Hawthorne, on behalf of the Royal British Legion, Scotland, the wreath with a saltire. He was an instructor in the Royal Navy, served on all kinds of ships, Fearless and Hermes and Zulu and Glasgow. And the Royal British Legion, Scotland, has nearly 140 branches and clubs all over Scotland, 20,000 members, again looking after ex-servicemen. And now Brian Everett lays a wreath on behalf of Transport for London, president of the London Transport Old Comrades Association since 1992. Remember, the bus drivers were brought here by George V in 1920 because they'd worked during the war taking troops to the front, and he thought they should be recognized as well as the military. The King's wreath there at the foot of the Cenotaph. And in a moment, the veterans who are gathered here in Whitehall will start marching past the Cenotaph and past the Cenotaph down round into Parliament Square and onto Horse Guards, where the salute is taken by the Princess Royal. Now, many of them have, of course, come here before, but each year there are newcomers, spanning generations. This year, for instance, there's a 99-year-old World War II veteran, Alec Penstone, and a 36-year-old James Rose, who served in Afghanistan. Both of them marching for the first time. And this is why.
The reason I joined the military in the first place was because my brother joined before me. When I joined, I was 20-year-old. We were deployed to Afghanistan in September 2009. I wasn't on a deployment list to go. I went in, told the Sergeant Major that I wanted to go. I always remember when the plane landed. I kind of aged about 10 years straight away because everything just felt real. And I just said to myself, what am I doing here? On 10th of November, just a normal routine patrol. I was at the front of the metal detector, clearing the route, and got this gut feeling. Took one more step, and that's when I heard a click. The IED kind of blasted me into the air, about 5 or 10 metres. Everything was silent, and all you can hear is like a beep. I remember just waking up in Birmingham then. At the time, I didn't really know my injuries. I kind of like sat up in bed and just went like that straight away. And just went, oh, I've got no legs. I was injured the day before, Remembrance Day, so it kind of brings everything back. I get flashbacks every single day of the week, but I kind of know how to deal with them flashbacks and how to deal with the thoughts now. Marching past the Cenotaph, I have been asked in the past, but I was in a bad place. I think I'm ready to do it this year. Just being around people who've been in your situation, it's massively comforting. For me, it's a time to reflect and acknowledge like the sacrifices people have took in the past and continue to do so.
I'm now 98 years old, and to take part in the march past would be the icing on the cake. To be able to pay my respects to all those that have gone before me and done so much for this country, including my dad. The reason I carry on selling poppies is because the British Legion was so kind to my father when he was dying. He got severely wounded in the Second Battle of the Somme. My father died 5 months before the Second World War started. I'd already promised him I wouldn't go in the trenches. I actually joined the Royal Navy just before I was 18. I felt I was doing my bit for the country, honouring his name as well. And I started off on the Arctic convoys. We were attacked constantly from the air, and we could hear the explosions when ships of the convoy were hit by torpedoes. We were very, very lucky that we escaped.
Thank you for your service.
I was very, very lucky one.
Aww.
I managed to survive the war, but this country would not exist if it hadn't been for the dedication of all those hundreds of thousands of people that now lay in France or other places. It all stays so fresh in my mind. This would be my last wish, to be able to walk past the cenotaph and pay my respects to all those that have gone before me.
Alec Penston, who's 99, is going to be here today and says it's the icing on the cake. And James Rose, the young man before him, both taking part in this march past. The band of the Coldstream Guards will lead off the trustees of the British Legion at the front of the parade, and then we begin with the Gurkha Brigade Association. One word about this. It's often mistaken and thought that this is a military parade, people marching under their regimental banner, so to speak, but it's not. It's a parade of associations who represent the regiments, the associations who look after those who've been in war, who need help. So these are charitable and support organizations. They're not marching when we say the Blues and Royals or the 1st Battalion or whatever it is. It's not a military parade for them. This is a civilian parade. And it's led off by the Gurkha Brigade Association today and the British Gurkha Welfare Society. 40 Gurkha battalions who fought in World War II. Selected from Nepal, from young men living in the hills of Nepal. And the Gurkha Brigade Association, their officers primarily in the front. And if you've watched this before, you'll know the familiar pattern. The various contingents come past and each hands a wreath, which is laid at the foot of the cenotaph. And now behind the Gurkhas, the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, the Welsh Guards, the London Regiment Association, and the Guards Parachute Association. The maroon beret of the Parachute Association. They were employed in very dangerous work, falling into enemy territories. They're followed by the Royal Regiment of Scotland, the Royal Scots Regimental Association, the King's Own Borderers, and here the Black Watch Association, their blue bonnets with the red hackle. Bill Hall, who we saw earlier, is marching there among them. They're followed by the Queen's Own Highlanders Regimental Association, the Fraser Macduff and North East Gordon Highlanders, the Gordon Highlanders London Association, Glengarry, being worn by the Regimental Association of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. Queen's Regiment, the senior English Line Infantry Regiment, merged with the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment. Many of these regiments marching past have been merged and merged and merged again, of course, as the army has shrunk in size from somewhere around 250,000 in the 60s to 60,000 or so today. The Green Howards. Arthur Oborne, who landed on D-Day, 98. Marching past with them. So the Yorkshire regiments, Prince of Wales' own, the Green Howards, the Cheshires, the Royal Welsh, the Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters, the Staffordshire Regiment, the Regimental Association, the Royal Irish, the Combined Irish Regiments, Ulster Defence Regiment. Parachute Regiment Association in their red, or rather maroon berets again, formed by Winston Churchill in 1940. They were preceded by the Combined Irish Regiments and followed by the Rifles Office, the Light Infantry, and the Durham Light Infantry, and the Rifles and Royal Gloucestershire, Berkshire, Wiltshire Regimental Association, Royal Gloucesters, some of them wearing the black beret. Glorious Gloucesters for their role in the infamous, or famous I should say, Battle of Imjin River in the Korean War. Many of them became prisoners of war. They won 3 VCs. They're followed by the Rifles Regimental Association, Green Jackets, wearing the green uniform, designed to make them less visible on the battlefield, and famously march. I don't know whether you've ever tried this at 140 paces a minute. Not quite so fast this morning. The non-association Veterans Army, those are people marching not attached to a particular regiment, but just marching here because they fought in the war, or they're retired servicemen. The British Limbless Ex-Servicemen's Association, BLESMA, preceded by Combat Stress, the organisation set up for those with shell shock. James Rose, who we saw a moment ago in the film, who served in Afghanistan and has since climbed Kilimanjaro. The British Ex-Services Wheelchair Sports Association, the Wheelchair Sports Association, led by Edwin Thomas, founded in the late 80s to support wheelchair sports. Care for veterans following, a hospital home in Worthing, and the blind veterans, the wreath being carried by Dennis Smith, 97 years old, fought in the Green Howards in 1944, served throughout Northwest Europe in World War II, discharged from the army in 1948. The blind veterans, some being assisted by their friends or colleagues. The Royal Hospital Chelsea, the Chelsea pensioners, British Army veterans, go there in return for giving up their pension. Live together pretty well under the discipline of military service. And the Royal Star and Garter homes used to be in Richmond. The Royal Logistic Corps, made up of the Royal Corps of Transport. They're the professional logisticians who keep the army marching and the Ordnance Corps before them. The Royal Dragoon Guards, now a multi-row armoured cavalry regiment. They're preceded by the Royal Scots Dragoons, the Blues and Royals Association, the Household Cavalry that is, and the Lifeguards Association, and followed by the Queen's Royal Hussars, the Royal Lancers, the 16th, 5th Queen's Royal Lancers, 17th, 21st Lancers, the Death or Glory Boys, the King's Royal Hussars, and the Light Dragoons. And so this procession goes past, many, many more to come, but just for a moment, let's join Sophie.
I'm here with two people who are going to be marching with Scotty's Little Soldiers, the charity set up for bereaved military children. They only started taking part for the first time in 2019. And I'm here with Lennon Palin and his mother, Carla Palin, and they're here for the first time. Your father, Mark, he was killed, wasn't he, in Afghanistan in 2011. Yeah. What does it mean to you to be here today?
It brings me a lot of proudness to represent him as a person and the good things he'd done for serving our country.
There are 46 children marching with you today. The youngest is 8. You've met some of them already. What's it like meeting other children like that?
It makes me feel sad because although I lost my dad at a young age, seeing children that young losing their dad, it just makes me feel sad.
You were only 1, weren't you, when your father died? Yeah. And being here today now, I mean, the atmosphere is amazing, isn't it?
Yes, I've spoke to some people and they're just feeling happy for us, and yeah.
And Carla, it's particularly difficult for you today, isn't it? I mean, I know you've thought about coming here many times, but it's Mark's birthday today, isn't it? He would have been 45.
Yeah. Yes, it's his birthday today, but as always, it lands with Remembrance. So, as a family, we just remember and carry on.
And you're here with your daughter as well, aren't you?
I am, Ruby, yeah.
For you as a family, I mean, it's going to be an extraordinary moment, isn't it?
Yeah,
Walking past the
very, very proud. Proud of my children, proud of their dad, proud of everyone that served the country.
Yeah, I think your father would be very proud of you, young man.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll leave you to take your places. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll see them later. Scotty's little heroes. The Royal Signals Association, marching past now, followed by the Army Air Corps Association. It is, of course, impossible to list every contingent that's marching here, and that's not the point of the March Past. The point of the March Past is that all these veterans have come from all the corners of the armed services and from all the corners of the world to remember those that were killed in war and to mark once again each year the service that they and their comrades played. So forgive me if there are contingents going past who aren't identified. As I say, the identification is not the point. The point is the 10,000 veterans who've come here today on Remembrance Sunday to commemorate those two wars and the wars that followed. The Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers there. Andy Allen, who came, there he is on the right of your screen, whose father came with the Windrush generation and was the first cadet of colour at Sandhurst, talking earlier on to Sophie about how proud he was to be here today. And with a host of medals on his chest. Army dog unit from Northern Ireland with the dogs' leads around their shoulders, military working dogs, and a red paw headdress and a red paw on the wreath. Dogs who used to work in bomb-blasted areas searching for casualties and blooded their paws as a result, hence that mark on the wreath that they laid the Cenotaph. Here we have the Royal Military Police here, the Pay Corps, the Intelligence Corps, the Physical Training Corps, Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps, and the Women's Royal Army Corps, Royal Military Police Association, and there's Scarlet Berets. Marching here in the contingent of the Royal Air Force Survival Equipment Roy Farmler, 99-year-old, World War II veteran, ditched when his Sunderland flying boat caught fire off the West African coast, and the Survival Equipment Association provided parachutes and life-saving injection seats, life preservers and all the rest for the Royal Air Force. The Mountain Rescue Association is here too, the Linguists Association, the Women's Royal Air Force, Women's Auxiliary Air Force and Women in the RAF Association. The chair is Tracy Watson, who served 30 years in the Women's Royal Air Force. First recruited into the Air Force in 1918, and then disbanded after the First World War, and came back for the Second World War. Wearing white service caps, the Royal Air Force Police Association, the snowdrops as they're called. And as I said earlier, these processions come round down to the bottom of Whitehall and then round to a saluting base. And the salute is taken here by the Princess Royal, and with her, Grant Shapps, the Secretary for Defence, and Vice Admiral Johnson, National President of the Royal British Legion. So that this is, in that sense, a semi-military parade, because the salute is taken at the end of it. And for many of these veterans, it's a long walk. They've been waiting an hour and a half or more on Whitehall, and then come down and round and back. It's another quarter of an hour or so before they come to the saluting base. Air Sea Rescue and Marine Crafts sections of the Royal Air Force with their white rolled neck sea sweaters, standard rig during the war at sea. And in front of them were the Royal Air Force ex-prisoners of war, mainly here today those shot down and taken prisoner during the First Gulf War, the eviction of Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Princess Mary's Royal Air Force Nursing Service Association sky blue scarves that they wear, formed in 1918. and the Women's Royal Air Force Association. The Canopy Club Association, parachute jumpers who served in the British military, led by Squadron Leader Reed, and the Royal Air Forces Association Armourers branch, and the important job of maintaining and loading aircraft bombs. Technical Training School, RAF Locking, opened in the beginning of the Second World War. And before then, the trade groups, the 8th Squadron Association, 1370 Global Branch of the RAF Force Association, 84 Squadron Association, the Flight Engineers, the Medical Services Trades, the Royal Air Forces Caduceus branch, and 31 Squadron Association, formed in 1915, first aircraft squadron to operate in India on the northwest frontier. Their motto is "First in the Indian skies." In Caelum Indicum Primus, if you want it in Latin. Now the 4th column, coming down from Whitehall, led by the British West India Regiment Heritage Trust. And remembering again the arrival of Windrush 75 years ago, which brought back many people who'd fought in the Second World War and then came back to help reconstruct Britain after the war. Behind them, the LGBT plus organization, Fighting with Pride, which interestingly has its wreath layers walking at the back, not in front, to allow the veterans who have been forcibly dismissed from the service to walk at the front. Scotty's Little Soldiers, we were hearing from one of them with Sophie just before. Scotty's Little Soldiers, a 9-year-old laying the wreath. These are children of those killed in war. And it was formed because it was felt that they had a right and needed to be here. So that it wouldn't just be the parents or brothers and sisters of the bereaved, but the children as well. The organization looks after them and gives them support and presents at Christmas. The British nuclear test veterans, they're always here, remembering those who either killed during the testing of nuclear weapons in the 50s and 60s or died from the effects afterwards. And the legacy of the atomic bomb and recognition for atomic test survivors. They were awarded last year the Nuclear Test Medal, many of them for their service, which they're wearing for the first time, the medals. And followed by the Commando veterans, the Italy's Star Association, with a 99-year-old veteran. Extraordinary, the number of 99, 98-year-olds who are still making it here this year, and many of them coming regularly, some just coming for the first time. Help for Heroes. This was the organization, the charity that was founded during the war in Afghanistan, the 20-year war in Afghanistan, to help those who were injured, disabled. Did terrific work, raised a lot of money, supports 27,000 veterans. And not just people with physical illness, but many people, as we now know, who have problems with mental health in the future. Something that was, until recently, perhaps rather less prominent in the charitable sector, but now very important. The Spirit of Normandy Trust, the anniversary of the Normandy League, the Monte Cassino Society, the Burma Star Memorial Fund, the Chindits, the Australian in their bush hats, Chindit Society, 98 years old, the wreath layer. Two 98-year-olds in that Chindit march past. The National Malaya and Borneo Veterans Association. The uprising in Malaya after the Second World War, which didn't end until 1960, often forgotten. And the Gallantry Medalist League, the oldest association for gallantry in the United Kingdom. Alec there, who we heard from before, talking about coming here and at the salute as he goes past. The Kuenssberg Club, casualty evacuation for those seriously wounded in combat in Iraq. Those who had injuries and scars that had been forgotten in civilian life and needed special help. Casualty evacuation, Kuenssberg. The National Gulf Veterans and Families Association was before them. The canteen service, the Polish contingent. The Medical Emergency Response Team. The Metropolitan Police, Armed Forces veterans. They're all military veterans on parade today who've gone on to join the police subsequently, wearing their police uniforms. The Trucial Oman Scouts, red and white shimags with a black rope, a ghoul there. Trucial Oman Scouts, established by the British in the early 50s to keep peace in what are now called the United Arab Emirates. I don't know whether we'll see them, but the Dutch are always here. The Bond van Wapenbroeders, who, like the members of Polish Air Force or regiments, come here despite not being in the Commonwealth. They're veterans of the Czech Republic marching here. So it's not just the UK and the Commonwealth, but here in the march past, a few groups. They're not, of course, the major force of the United States who helped win the war, but those who came from Europe, some of them, Holland, Czech Republic, Poland. And now the Royal Naval Association, Robert Hardy, the 98-year-old veteran who served in the Battle of the Atlantic, marching with his two grandsons, and a 102-year-old veteran, Bernard Golding, marching here. Merchant Navy Association. Merchant Navy Association represents the 50,000 or more seafarers who died at sea, are not buried on land, have no grave. And in recognition of the role of the Merchant Navy, the Red Ensign is the only civilian flag that flies on the Cenotaph, on the other side from that picture you're seeing there. And this is the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Atlantic, which provided food and munitions and troops to Europe from across the Atlantic. The Aircrewmen's Association is here, the Ark Royal Association, probably the oldest named ship in the Royal Navy. It was the flagship at the Armada in 1588. The white anchor of the Merchant Navy Association. So we have the submariners passing through, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, the Association of Wrens, the Merchant Navy Association, the Fizguard Association, Ganges, the medical branch of the Navy. And as they go past, let's just for a moment rejoin Sophie on Horse Guards.
Well, this is what happens after the march past. Everyone gathers here on Horse Guards Parade, the stories told, a lot of chat, a lot of banter, a lot of memories exchanged. I'm joined by Caroline Whitaker, who has taken part for the first time, haven't you?
That's right.
And you served with the army, and you were in Iraq.
That's correct.
20 years ago at the start of the Iraq War. You were running a big field hospital there.
That's right, 202 Field Hospital.
What was it like for you today when you took part for the first time?
Oh, it's just been absolutely wonderful to be back with all the sort of military ethos again, military people, and I've met some people today that I haven't seen for years. So it's been really wonderful, you know, just to be part of this.
That's what people often say, it's about the connections, isn't
absolutely.
it? I think for a lot of veterans it's about being with people who they can really talk to very openly, can't they?
Yes, you relate straight away. As soon as you're in the military, you know, it's the sort of comradeship through and through, really. And you remember what people have been through, you know, what they've served, the sacrifices they've given, and that's what you remember coming here.
And when you went past the Cenotaph a very short time ago, who did you think of?
All the wonderful people that I serve with in civilian life, but also when I serve on operations, and the skill and service that they give. That's what I think about.
And a very emotional moment, isn't it?
It's very
highly
emotional.
charged.
Yes, very much so.
And now, afterwards, you can exchange your memories. You have lovely stories that people tell, isn't it, aren't there?
Oh yes, lovely. And it's just wonderful to be with people I haven't seen for so long. And many of them are still serving, of course, but many retired. And we forget with veterans that how much they have done for the country. So a service like this to come to is just great.
Caroline Whittaker, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Fleet Air Arm Association, just passing through the Fleet Air Arm Buccaneer Association, the air arm field gun. It's interesting, they competed in the field gun competition. This is the kind of organisation that gets people to stick together. They used to be at the World Tournament, and well, after the war, reassembling and jumping guns over barricades and all that. It's stopped now, but anyway, they still march together. The Fighting G Club, the Gloucester Survivors Association, they were preceded by HMS Tiger, Illustrious, Hermes, Bulwark, Glorious, the Ton Class Association, County Class Destroyers, the Naval Air Squadron, the Sea Harriers, Royal Naval Photographers, the Cloud Observers, and after them HMS Exeter, Glasgow, the Type 21 frigates, the Type 42 frigates, the Lowestoft, HMS Lowestoft, and Plymouth and Ardent, lost in May 1982. As President Lord West of Spithead, who was captain of Ardent in the Falklands, the Andromeda Association, the Argonaut, Scylla, the Ariadne, the Jupiter, Penelope, Broadsword, the Royal Naval Benevolent Trust, HMS St Vincent Association. Now almost the final column, not quite the final column, marching past Transport for London. We saw a wreath laid on behalf of London Transport, and explained then it was because many transport workers died in both world wars, but also they were first recognised for driving troops to the front from the rear guard in the First World War, led by Barry Osborne, and a wreath laid by Brian Everett, who served in the Royal Air Force. Women's Royal Voluntary Services, an organisation recognising civilians killed in enemy action. The Royal Ulster Constabulary in their green blazers, the George Cross Association, recognised as the most dangerous police force in the world to serve in. 300 members of the RUC killed during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. 50 of them on parade today, led by Terence Chin. And they're followed by the National Association of Retired Police Officers, the International Police Association, Metropolitan Special Constabulary, the British evacuees who were representing 3.5 million children in the Second World War, Civil Defence Association, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, the wreath being laid by Rich Hills, the Director for Africa and Asia. They commemorate nearly 2 million Commonwealth servicemen and women who died during the two world wars. They look after graves in over 20,000 places in 150 countries. They were preceded by children of the Far East Prisoners of War, TOC-H, the Gallipoli Association. First Aid Nursing Yeomanry follow them, and St John Ambulance and the British Red Cross and St Andrew's First Aid. And behind them, the Munition Workers Association. One of them, Margaret Machin, has got the wreath, is 100 years old. St Andrew's First Aid. People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, the RSPCA, as well behind them. They were preceded by the Salvation Army, the Showman's Guild, the Union Jack Club. The National Association of Round Tables of Great Britain, Corps of Commissionaires, Commissionaires, a company set up to give employment. Originally, interestingly, to people coming home from the war in the Crimea. Now the youth contingent, the Sea Cadets and the Army Cadets and the Royal Air Force Cadets. Boys and girls in school who go through military training, go to camp, learn to fly, don't necessarily go into the forces. The combined cadet force, many schools have a CCF, where pupils go and parade and learn how to fire a rifle and learn a bit about military service. There are even volunteer police cadets, volunteer fire cadets, and St John Ambulance and the Scout Association and Girl Guiding, and the Boys Brigade is here, and the Girls Brigade, and the Church Lads, and the Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade, and the YMCA. There's something a little unnerving after seeing so many veterans who fought in wars, to see a whole new young generation marching past in their innocence. Who knows what fate and what future will await them in the world of today. But they mark the last marchers in this march past of nearly 10,000 people. The field of poppies round the Cenotaph. So as the final contingents pass the Cenotaph there on the right, let's just go to Horse Guards for a moment and join Sophie Rayworth.
Well, it is really filling up here at Horse Guards Parade now. I'm joined by Mark Jewell, who marched with the RAF Survival Equipment Association, and by no means the first time for you. You've been here how many times now?
13 times now.
And what brings you back year after year?
Loyalty to my mates and to the people who've gone before us. And just getting people together with us, and quite a few people say to me, you just don't know what you've done for me to get me here. It's an enormous and emotional experience for us, and thank you for doing it.
You had one very special person with you today, didn't you? You had one of the very few World War II veterans.
Yes, we had a gentleman called Roy Farmelow, who was a member of the Goldfish Club, and he's 100, and he will celebrate his 101st birthday in January next year. His son told me today that he will wake up tomorrow and say, are we ready for next year? So I'll be having that discussion with him sort of before Christmas, and we'll get him here next year if we can.
I was talking to a World War II veteran earlier who was 101, and it was just wonderful to see the reaction he got from everybody around him. Everyone was queuing up to shake his hand,
He
take
absolutely
photographs.
loves it. He does. He's a real dynamo, really, to be coming each year. It's been 3 times now. So we don't know whether he's going to make it each year, but obviously he's here again, and he'll be wanting to come back next year.
And you're very much a military family, aren't you? Your father, your grandfather, I think?
Yes,
and your son?
My son, myself, my grandfathers on both sides of the family. I've got aunts, great aunts, going all the way back that have served the military. And I've got a son who's a police officer, so we serve the community and country.
And just give us an idea of what it is like now, because everyone comes off, they've done the march past, they gather here, and you can. It's wonderful to watch people just chatting away, isn't it?
This is only part of it. It's the gathering, making new and old friendships, rekindling those friendships, but sharing the stories, the laughter, the jokes, the banter that we all have amongst us. I would say, within His Majesty's forces, that's a second to none, right? So the joy that we have amongst each other, you can't get it anywhere else. It's a special moment.
It's very special to see. Mark Jewell, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Sophie. Cheers.
The march past on Horse Guards continues. Princess Royal on the dais taking the salute. She is both an admiral in the Royal Navy, a general in the Army, and an Air Chief Marshal in the Royal Air Force, but today in the uniform of an admiral of the Royal Navy, Chief Commandant for women in the Royal Navy. And with her on the dais, the newly appointed Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps, on her left, and on her right, Vice Admiral Sir Clive Johnson, who's the National President of the Royal British Legion. Horse Guards looking like a cross between a parade ground and a sort of celebration party for people who've been marching past the Cenotaph. And as Sophie was saying and talking to people, it's a great reunion that happens here. One of the things that brings everybody here is to meet up with their old mates, come from all over the world.
Well, I'm joined here on Horse Guards. Everybody gathering here, as you say, for a sort of reunion and sharing memories. Kuenssberg Meadow, who was served with the Army, and JJ Adams, who served with the RAF. Thank you both very much for talking to us. JJ, first of all, when you left the RAF, you felt that you were devastated, weren't you?
Absolutely. It was, for me, I'm the third generation, all through the three generations. And I was completely and utterly lost, but I went into security, which was a parallel in a way, because most of us are ex-military, so we had that, still had that military structure. But I felt as if that was it. It was all over. It was very, very difficult, very difficult.
And so being here today, with all this gathering, with all this sort of, reconciliation, people meeting again, what is it like for you?
It's just brilliant. Few emotions, a lot of emotions, people I haven't seen for 30 years. People I haven't seen for so long, and we all have that nod. You know, when somebody walks down the road, you just look at them and you think, they're ex-military. You just know. And it's a great comfort, and it's a belonging. It really is. It's our family.
And what about you, Kuenssberg?
It's a great experience to be here. It's my first time being here, and it's a great opportunity to remember and to reflect. Remember those that's gone before us, and also reflect on our time serving as well.
And it's a much more light-hearted atmosphere here now, but when you walked past the Cenotaph, and given it was your first time, describe that moment. What was it like?
It was a thrilling moment for me. As I said, it's first time being here, and being able to give the opportunity to remember on a large scale and being around some people I've served with as well. It was a very memorable and great experience for me.
And you wanted to be here as well, just to show people that veterans are all ages, really.
Yes.
There's no sort of distinct veteran, is there?
Yes. And one of that came about from my experience in 2020 at Waterloo Station, when I told someone, oh, I've served, I'm a veteran as well, and I wasn't taken seriously. So it was a little bit disappointing, a little bit heartening. So this is a great opportunity to prove that veterans come, male, females, every color, every nation. So great opportunity to be here, to be a part of.
And JJ, who did you remember when you were walking past the Cenotaph?
Crumbs. Lots of friends that I've lost, my family as well. And the biggest...
And you must say your father's medals, your grandfather's medals that you're wearing?
Yes, as much as I can, because without them I wouldn't be here. And it's so important that we have to look back to be able to see forward more clearly. And all we ask for is for the length of time it takes to make a cup of tea, just to remember us. That's all we ask for.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Sophie, very much.
A powerful insight into what brings people young and old here on this Remembrance Sunday. And in another part of Horse Guards, the Princess Royal still taking the salute. With a long way to go. London Transport going past. And still marching past in style.
Well, a lot of people here who are taking part for the very first time, and for them it is a big moment, an emotional moment, and that goes for Mark Reed and Richie Sharp. You served together in Afghanistan, didn't you? In 2009.
Yeah.
And you didn't see each other for a long time after that.
Yeah.
And then you've marched today with Help for Heroes. Just explain why it has been so important for both of you.
So we kind of kept in contact through social media, but we never saw each other face to face. Early 2019, I left the army myself, started work with Help for Heroes late 2019, and my manager at the time asked me to get in contact with a veteran who'd reached out to the charity. As I was reading down the information, first thing that jumped out was the name, then the cap badge, and then it was pretty obvious. So when I spoke to Richie, I identified myself as Mark Reed first. However, I've always been known as Taff. So I had to say Richie is Taff, and we went from there.
So tell us what it was like today for you two to march
absolutely
past
amazing.
Cenotaph.
It's an amazing event, and absolutely humble and privileged to march with Mark. He's helped me over the years after finishing my time injury-wise, and like I say, very humbling indeed.
It's for a lot of people, it is about reconnecting, isn't it? It's about seeing each other and those connections that you don't really have with anybody else, do you?
Yeah.
Well, there's been, besides Richard, there's been 40 more veterans that Help for Heroes works with marching today. And as Richie said, it's a humbling experience, but to march alongside those beneficiaries of the charity is even more humbling. They get up each and every day, Richie to my left here, and they get on with life, and it's so amazing to work with them.
Do you know what? It's humbling for all of us to see as well. Thank you both, gentlemen, very much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Sophie.
Back here on Whitehall, the Cenotaph now rises up from a field of poppies, each wreath bearing witness to the memories of those who came here today to honour family or friends killed in war. The glorious dead are the words inscribed on the Cenotaph, but lest we forget the words that are more often heard on Remembrance Sunday. And there is little chance of forgetting the First World War, then the Second, and the wars almost every year since, with fighting raging today in Europe, in Africa, in the Middle East. As the saying goes, only the dead have seen the end of war. From Whitehall in London, goodbye.
On this Remembrance Sunday,